The afternoon bells of Cedar Springs rang hollow against the desert wind. Ruth Hale stood at the cemetery gate, her black dress already gathering red dust from the street. Behind her, the townspeople filed out of the small church, their whispers following like tumbleweeds. 20 years old and already a widow, Martha Perkins muttered to her sister, though what kind of widow? One wonders. Ruth kept her eyes on the fresh mound of earth where they'd just laid her husband. Reverend Samuel Hale had been 43 years her senior when he'd taken her as his wife 8 months ago. Now the yellow fever had taken him, and she was alone in a town that had never wanted her. The church's blue glass windows caught the dying light. Those windows had been Samuel's pride shipped all the way from St. Louis. Ruth touched the worn edges of the Bible in her hands. Its leather binding had cracked in the desert heat. Pages yellowed from her husband's constant reading. Mrs. Hale. Deacon Abram Pike approached, his boots clicking on the packed earth. 2 men flanked him, Marcus Webb and Tom Garrett, both carrying the weight of authority and Winchester rifles. "My condolences on your loss." Ruth nodded, not trusting her voice. Pike's gray eyes held no sympathy, only calculation. "The church board will need to discuss the parsonage," Pike continued. "As you know, it belongs to the congregation. We'll need it ready for the next minister." "I understand," Ruth said quietly. "Samuel left some affairs to settle. I'll need a few weeks." Pike's mouth tightened. "A week should suffice. The Lord's work doesn't wait for grief." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever Ruth might have said. A lone rider approached from the east, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. The stranger's horse was trail-worn, dust coating its flanks. He dismounted at the cemetery fence, removing his hat as the church bell rang its evening call. Ruth noticed his clothes, first good quality but weathered, the mark of a man who lived between towns. His face carried the deep tan of desert living, eyes the color of creek water. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Evening," the stranger said, his voice low. "Sorry to intrude on your sorrow." Pike stepped forward. "This is a private gathering, Mr. Best you move along." The stranger's gaze moved from Pike to Ruth, lingering on the Bible in her hands. "Just paying respects. Any town that buries its preacher deserves acknowledgement." "You knew Reverend Hale?" Ruth asked, surprising herself by speaking. "Knew of him. Word travels even to drifters like me. They say he was a righteous man." "Righteous indeed," Pike interjected, though his judgment in some matters was questioned. His eyes cut to Ruth. The stranger noticed the look. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. "Name's Jonah Quinn. I'll be needing supplies and a place to stable my horse for the night." "McCready's got rooms above the saloon," Webb offered, "though we don't encourage lingering." Quinn nodded, replacing his hat. "Ma'am," he said to Ruth, "my sympathies." He led his horse toward town, spurs jingling softly in the evening air. Ruth watched him go, then turned to find Pike still studying her. "1 week, Mrs. Hale. The congregation has been patient enough." After the others left, Ruth remained by the grave. The wind picked up, rattling the wooden marker that would serve until a proper stone could be carved. She knelt, placing her hand on the disturbed earth. "I kept my promise, Samuel," she whispered, "just as you asked." The walk back to the parsonage was short, but felt endless. Every window along Main Street held watching eyes. Ruth kept her head high, though her shoulders ached from the effort. The small house sat beside the church, its whitewash peeling in the desert heat. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch, key already in hand, but as she reached for the door, something made her stop. There, scratched in charcoal beneath the kitchen window, someone had written a single word: "Temptress." Ruth stared at the accusation, her hand trembling on the key. The charcoal was fresh, written while she'd been at the cemetery. She thought of Pike's cold eyes, of Martha Perkins's whispers, of all the suspicious looks that had followed her since the day Samuel brought her to Cedar Springs as his bride. Inside the house, she lit the oil lamp with steady hands. The light revealed Samuel's study, his book still open on the desk, everything exactly as he'd left it 3 days ago when the fever took him. Ruth set down the Bible and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening town. Across the street, she could see the saloon's lights beginning to glow. Somewhere in there, Jonah Quinn was probably washing trail dust from his throat. A drifter. He'd said, someone who moved between places, never staying long enough for the dust to settle. Ruth touched the wedding ring on her finger. It was loose. She'd lost weight in the months since her marriage. Samuel had been kind to her. In his way, he'd saved her from something worse, though the price had been its own burden. The wind rattled the windows, and Ruth noticed one of the blue panes had cracked. She'd have to fix it before she left. Pike would inspect everything, looking for any excuse to paint her as negligent or worse. She moved through the small house, mental notes forming. The good dishes would need packing. Samuel's books should go to the church library. His clothes. She wasn't sure what to do with his clothes. No family had come forward to claim anything. In the bedroom, Ruth paused at the narrow bed where Samuel had spent his last hours. She'd slept in the parlor those final nights, tending him when the fever spiked. The doctor said there was nothing to be done but pray and wait. She'd done both, though neither had saved him. A knock at the door made her jump. Ruth checked the clock past 8 now, too late for proper visits. She approached carefully, lamp in hand. "Who is it?" "Jonah Quinn. Ma'am, I've got something you should see." Ruth hesitated, then cracked the door. Quinn stood on the porch, his expression serious in the lamplight. "I don't mean to impose," he said, "but I noticed something when I walked past earlier." He gestured to the wall. "Thought you should know someone's been marking your house." "I saw it," Ruth said quietly. Quinn studied her face. "This happened before." "Not in charcoal." The words came out bitter. "They usually just whisper." "Mind if I—" He gestured to the wall. Ruth stepped aside, and he produced a bandana from his pocket. A few minutes' work removed most of the word, though shadows remained in the wood grain. "Thank you," Ruth said, "though they'll just write it again." "Maybe, maybe not." Quinn straightened, tucking the bandana away. "Sometimes a witness changes things." Ruth looked at him, really looked. His hands were calloused but clean. His gun sat easy on his hip, but his manner held no threat, just a quiet watchfulness, like a man who'd learned to read the wind. Mr. Quinn, why did you really stop here?" He considered the question. "Needed supplies, like I said, but—" He glanced at the church. "I've been riding a long spell. Sometimes a man needs to stop where there's grief. Reminds him he's still human." It was an odd answer, but somehow it rang true. Ruth found herself almost smiling. "Would you like some coffee? I was about to make some." "That's kind, but I shouldn't. People talk enough as it is." "They're already talking." Ruth said, "Might as well have coffee while they do it." Quinn looked at her widow's weeds, lamp in hand, chin lifted in quiet defiance. Something passed over his face. Decision or recognition? "In that case, ma'am, I'd be obliged." Ruth led him to the kitchen, aware of the impropriety but too tired to care. Let them talk. In a week she'd be gone anyway. Once Pike had his house back. She set water to boil while Quinn took a seat at the small table. Neither spoke as she prepared the coffee, the ritual filling the silence. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the cracked window pane. "How long were you married?" Quinn asked eventually. 8 months. Ruth set a cup before him. "He was kind." Quinn heard what she didn't say. "And Pike wants you out." "The house belongs to the church. It's only right." "Plenty of things are legal that aren't right." Ruth sat across from him. wrapping her hands around her own cup. "You speak like someone who's seen both sides of that line." "Maybe I have." He took a sip. "Good coffee." They sat in comfortable silence. Ruth found herself studying his face, the small scar on his jaw, the way his eyes tracked every sound from outside. A careful man, but not a fearful one. "Where will you go?" he asked. "After the week's up?" "I haven't decided. East, maybe. Somewhere with grass instead of sand." "Takes money to go east." Ruth's fingers tightened on the cup. "Samuel left a small amount. It should be enough for travel." Quinn nodded, not pressing. But Ruth saw him notice things: the mended tears in her dress, the empty hooks where pictures should hang, the way she'd portioned the coffee to make it last. A sound from outside made them both turn. Footsteps on the porch, followed by silence. Quinn rose quietly, hand moving to his hip. "Probably just," Ruth began, but he held up a hand. The doorknob rattled, then harder, as if someone was testing the lock. Quinn moved toward the door, but it stopped as suddenly as it started. Footsteps retreated rapidly. Ruth found she'd been holding her breath. "Does this happen often?" Quinn asked. "Sometimes," Samuel used to check, but he never found anyone. Quinn's expression darkened. He moved to the window, scanning the street. "I'll walk the perimeter before I go. Make sure they've really left." "You don't have to." "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." He finished his coffee and stood. "Thank you for the hospitality. Mrs. Hale, I'll be at McCready's if you need anything." After he left, Ruth locked the door and leaned against it. The house felt emptier than before, though nothing had changed. She carried the lamp to Samuel's study, drawn by habit to his desk. His journal lay open to the last entry, dated 3 days before he died. His usually steady handwriting showed the fever's effect. "Ruth remains faithful to our arrangement. I pray God forgives me for what I've asked of her. The flesh is weak, but her spirit proves strong. If anything happens, she must be protected. The wolves circle closer each day." Ruth closed the journal, her eyes burning. Protected. But Samuel was gone, and the wolves he'd worried about were already scratching at her door. She moved to close the curtains and froze. Across the street, barely visible in the shadows between buildings, someone watched the house. They stood perfectly still, just a darker shape against the dark. Then, as if sensing her gaze, they melted back into the night. Ruth pulled the curtains tight and checked every lock twice. In the morning, she'd start packing. 1 week to disappear before Cedar Springs devoured what was left of her reputation. But as she prepared for bed, one thought nagged at her. Jonah Quinn had said he was just passing through, needing supplies, so why had his saddlebags looked so light? And why had a drifter's first instinct been to protect instead of profit? The wind howled outside, and somewhere in the darkness, the church bell rang once, though whether from wind or human hands, Ruth couldn't tell. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Springs, but the heat was already building. Ruth stood at her kitchen window, watching the town wake. Across the street, Eli Morrison swept the steps of his general store. He glanced up, caught her looking, and quickly turned away. 3 days since the funeral, 4 until Pike's deadline. Ruth had started packing Samuel's books, but the work went slowly. Each volume held his careful notes in the margins, thoughts on scripture, observations about his flock. She'd found pressed flowers between pages, though she didn't know who'd put them there. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Ruth smoothed her dress and answered, finding Mrs. Chen from the laundry. The older woman held a wrapped bundle. "Your husband's shirts," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "All cleaned and pressed." "Thank you. What do I owe?" "Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Reverend Hale, he helped my son when nobody else would. This is already paid." Before Ruth could respond, the woman hurried away. Ruth watched her go. wondering what Samuel had done for the Chen boy. So many stories she'd never know. The morning passed in sorting and silence. Ruth had opened the windows despite the dust, needing air in the stifling house. She was wrapping Samuel's communion set when she heard hammering from outside. In the side yard, Jonah Quinn worked on her fence. Several broken slats lay on the ground, and he was fitting new ones in their place. His shirt hung on a post, and sweat gleamed on his back as he worked. "Mr. Quinn." Ruth stepped onto the porch. "What are you doing?" He straightened, wiping his brow. "Morning, Mrs. Hale. Noticed these were rotted through. Storm season's coming. I can't pay you for—" "Didn't ask for pay." He tested the new slat, satisfied when it held. "Man needs to keep his hands busy, idle hands and all that." Ruth studied him. "The devil's work. Samuel used to say that." "Smart man." Quinn reached for another board. "Though I've found the devil works just fine through busy hands too. You're not what you seem, Mr. Quinn." He paused, hammer in mid-swing. "What do I seem like?" "A drifter who carries education in his speech and caution in his manner. A man who fixes fences for widows but keeps his saddlebags light for quick leaving." Quinn smiled slightly. "You see clear, Mrs. Hale. Samuel taught me to look past surfaces, said it was important for a minister's wife." "What else did he teach you?" Ruth hesitated. Through the open church windows came the sound of organ music halting, broken notes as if someone was practicing who didn't quite know how. "He taught me that righteousness and reputation aren't the same thing." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the heat. "That sometimes protecting one means sacrificing the other." Quinn resumed his work. "Must have been hard, being young, married to a man of God, people watching everything you do." "They watched before I married him too." The words came out bitter. "At least as Samuel's wife, I had protection." The organ music stopped, started again, the same phrase over and over, never quite right. "Who's playing?" Quinn asked. "I don't know. The church should be locked." Ruth frowned. "Samuel was the only one who played, besides old Mrs. Hutchins, and she passed last winter." Quinn set down his hammer. "Mind if I check?" They walked to the church together, Ruth aware of curtains twitching as they passed. The front door stood slightly open. Inside, dusty light filtered through the blue windows, casting everything in underwater tones. At the organ sat a thin figure, Timothy Webb, the mayor's son. He couldn't have been more than 16. All angles and nervous energy. His fingers fumbled over the keys, trying to find a melody that escaped him. "Timothy," Ruth called softly. The boy jumped, knocking over the hymnal. "Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry. I didn't mean the door was open, and I just—" "It's all right." Ruth approached slowly. "I didn't know you played." Not really, but I heard it at the service. That hymn the Reverend liked. I wanted to remember it." His face flushed. "He was teaching me before he got sick." Ruth's throat tightened. Another story Samuel hadn't shared. "Which hymn?" "Shall we gather at the river?" He said it reminded him of better places. Ruth sat beside the boy on the bench. "Here, put your fingers like this." She guided his hands to the keys. "Samuel showed me once." Together they picked out the melody, halting but recognizable. Quinn leaned against a pew, watching. When they finished, Timothy's eyes were bright. "He said I had promise," the boy whispered. "Said maybe I could study music someday, if I worked hard. Then you should keep practicing." Ruth stood. "The church needs music." "But Mr. Pike said—" Timothy stopped, glancing at Quinn. "Said what?" Quinn's voice was mild, but Ruth heard the edge. "Nothing, just that things would change when the new minister comes." Timothy gathered his courage. "Mrs. Hale, is it true you're leaving?" "Yes, But why this is your home? Ruth touched the boy's shoulder. Sometimes we don't get to choose our homes. Timothy, now go on. Your mother will be looking for you. After the boy left, Ruth and Quinn stood in the empty church. The silence felt heavier than before, full of unplayed music and unspoken prayers. Pike's been busy, Quinn observed. He usually is. Ruth ran her fingers over the organ keys without pressing them. Samuel used to say Pike had plans for this town, big plans that needed the right kind of people. And you're not the right kind. A 20-year-old widow who married a man old enough to be her grandfather, Mr. Quinn. I'm exactly the wrong kind. They walked back to the parsonage. Quinn returned to the fence while Ruth continued packing, but she found herself watching him work, noting the efficient movements, the way he checked the street regularly without seeming to. Near noon, she brought him water. He drank gratefully, then nodded toward the house. You've got a board loose, under the kitchen window. Ruth's pulse quickened. Just wear and tear. Maybe, his eyes held hers. Or maybe someone's been prying, looking for something. There's nothing to find. Samuel lived simply. Men who live simply sometimes have the most to hide. Quinn set down the glass. I don't mean to pry, Mrs. Hale, but if you're in some kind of trouble, the only trouble I have is being unwanted in a town that never accepted me. Ruth kept her voice steady. Once I leave, everyone will be happier. Quinn looked like he wanted to say more, but hoofbeats interrupted. Pike approached with 2 riders, the same men from the cemetery. They dismounted at the gate, taking in Quinn's presence with calculating eyes. Mrs. Hale. Pike touched his hat brim. I see you've hired help. Mr. Quinn volunteered his assistance. Ruth said, How charitable. Pike's gaze swept over the repaired fence. Though I wonder at a drifter who works for free. Quinn straightened slowly. Man sees a job needs doing. He does it. No mystery there. Everything's a mystery when strangers are involved. Pike dismounted. Mind if we come in? Mrs. Hale, few matters to discuss about the transition. Ruth had no choice but to nod. The men followed her inside, Quinn trailing behind. In the parlor, Pike made himself comfortable while his men stood by the door. I've been going through the church records. Pike began. There seem to be some discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Donations that were recorded but never deposited. Purchases that lack receipts. Pike's smile was thin. Your husband wasn't much for bookkeeping, it seems. Ruth felt Quinn tense beside her. Samuel was honest in all his dealings. I'm sure, but the appearance of impropriety, well, that's damaging too, especially given other rumors. What rumors? Quinn asked quietly. Pike's eyes glittered. About the true nature of the Reverend's marriage. Some say it was never consecrated in the traditional sense. Heat flooded Ruth's face. How dare you? I dare because the church's reputation is at stake. Pike leaned forward. Now, I'm willing to overlook these financial irregularities. Call it Christian charity, but you need to be gone by week's end. As agreed. She'll leave when she's ready, Quinn said. Pike's men shifted, hands moving to their weapons. Pike himself remained calm. I don't believe we've been properly introduced, Mr. Quinn, and I don't believe threatening widows falls under Christian charity. No threat intended, simply clarifying expectations. Pike stood. Mrs. Hale, I trust you'll be reasonable. The town's been patient, but patience has limits. After they left, Ruth sank into a chair. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face. What are they looking for? Quinn asked. I don't know. The lie tasted bitter. Quinn crouched before her chair. Mrs. Hale, Ruth. Whatever hold they think they have, there are ways to fight it. She looked at him through her fingers. You don't understand. The things they're saying, some of them are true. About your marriage. Ruth nodded miserably. Samuel needed a wife for appearances. I needed protection. We made an arrangement. He was kind, but it was never... We lived as brother and sister, not husband and wife. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Doesn't make you less his widow. Doesn't make your grief less real. Tell that to the town gossips. Town gossips can hang. He stood. What matters is what you do next. Ruth rose, moving to the window. The fence stood straight and strong where Quinn had repaired it. Such a small thing, but it made the house look less abandoned. I found something, she said quietly, hidden under the floorboards in Samuel's study. A ledger, different from the official church records. Quinn waited. I think Samuel discovered something. About Pike. About the church finances. Maybe that's why she stopped. Why he got sick. Ruth met his eyes. Yellow fever takes who it takes. But the timing... Where's the ledger now? Hidden. Somewhere else. Ruth twisted her wedding ring. If Pike knew I had it. He won't hear it from me. Quinn moved toward the door. I'll finish the fence. You might want to check that loose floorboard. Though, make sure everything's secure. Ruth understood. After he left, she went to Samuel's study and carefully pried up the board beneath the desk. The space below was empty except for dust and her own fingerprints. The ledger rested safely in its new hiding place, wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath the rosebush Samuel had planted for her wedding day. The afternoon wore on. Quinn finished the fence and started on the loose window frames. Ruth watched him work. This strange man who'd appeared from nowhere and asked for nothing but coffee in return for kindness. As the sun began to sink, she made a decision, taking up her shawl. She walked to where Quinn was gathering his tools. Mr. Quinn Jonah, have supper with me. He paused. People will talk more. Let them. I'm already the temptress widow. What's one more scandal? Something shifted in his expression. In that case, I accept. They ate simply beans and cornbread, the last of the preserved peaches. Conversation came easier than Ruth expected. Quinn told stories of places he'd been, careful to avoid specifics. Ruth found herself laughing for the first time since Samuel's death. As darkness fell, Quinn helped her wash dishes. Their hands brushed in the soapy water, and Ruth felt something spark dangerous and warming at once. I should go, Quinn said softly. Yes. Neither moved. In the lamplight, his eyes were more green than brown. Ruth could smell sawdust and soap, honest scents that made her chest tight. A sound from outside broke the moment. Quinn stepped to the window, peering through the curtains. What is it? Nothing, maybe. He turned back to her. Lock up tight tonight. I'll walk the streets a bit before turning in. At the door, he paused. That ledger, whatever's in it, be careful. Men have killed for less than money. After he left, Ruth did as instructed, checking every lock, every window, in her bedroom. She knelt and said her prayers, though the words felt hollow. Outside, the wind picked up. The repaired fence held strong, but Ruth heard something else. Footsteps on the porch, the scrape of metal on wood. She crept to the window and peered out. A figure crouched by the loose floorboard Quinn had mentioned, prying at it with what looked like a crowbar. Ruth's heart hammered. The ledger was safe, but if they found the empty hiding place, they'd know she'd moved it. They'd tear the house apart looking... The figure cursed softly and moved to another board. Ruth recognized the voice. Tom Garrett, one of Pike's men. She had to do something, but what a woman alone against an armed man. Then she saw him, Quinn, moving silently through the shadows. He approached from behind, footsteps soundless on the dirt. Garrett never saw him coming. A brief struggle, quiet but vicious. Garrett went down. the crowbar clattering on the porch. Quinn dragged him to the street, propping him against a post like a drunk sleeping it off. Ruth met him at the door. Is he? He'll wake with a headache and a story no one will believe. Quinn's face was grim. They're getting desperate. Whatever your husband found, they need it gone. What should I do? Quinn touched her shoulder gently. For tonight's sleep, I'll be watching. You can't stay out there all night. Done it before. He smiled slightly. Got a fence to admire now? Makes it worthwhile. Ruth wanted to protest, but exhaustion was winning. She touched his hand where it rested on her shoulder. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She watched him disappear into the darkness, then locked the door. In her bedroom, she pulled Samuel's ledger from its hiding place one last time. The columns of numbers told a story she was only beginning to understand. Money moved in circles, always ending in Pike's control. And at the bottom of one page, in Samuel's careful hand, the railroad comes. God help us all. Ruth returned the ledger to its hiding place and lay down fully dressed. Outside, she knew Quinn kept watch, a drifter who fixed fences and fought her battles, asking nothing in return. But everyone wanted something. Samuel had taught her that. The question was what Jonah Quinn's something might be, and whether she could afford to pay it. The wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. 4 days left. 4 days to solve Samuel's mystery or lose everything to Pike's grasping hands. Ruth closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, while outside, her unlikely guardian kept his vigil against the desert night. The next morning brought clouds rare for Cedar Springs in summer. Ruth woke to find a flour sack on her porch, along with a small bag of salt and a tin of coffee. No note, but she knew who'd left them. She found Quinn at the water trough behind McCready's saloon, washing the desert from his face. His shirt showed tears from the previous night's scuffle. You can't keep buying me supplies, Ruth said. He straightened, water dripping from his jaw. Didn't buy anything. Wanted at cards. And the salt. McCready owed me for fixing his roof last month. Quinn dried his face with his sleeve. Man travels enough. He builds up favors. Ruth held out the small bundle she carried. Your shirt needs mending. It's the least I can do. He looked at the bundle, then at her. Something passed between them, understanding. Maybe, or recognition of debts that couldn't be tallied in flour and fence posts. I'll bring it by later, he said finally. Ruth walked back through town. Aware of the stares, Mrs. Perkins stood outside the millinery, whispering with 2 other women. Their conversation stopped as Ruth passed. Bold as brass, she heard one mutter, parading around with that drifter. Ruth kept walking. Let them talk. In 3 days, their opinions wouldn't matter. Back at the parsonage, she set water to boil and began preparing a simple meal. The beans from last night would stretch another day with fresh bread. As she worked, she found herself humming the hymn Timothy had tried to play. A knock interrupted. Ruth opened the door to find Ben Chen, the laundry woman's son. The boy, he couldn't be more than 12, held his cap in nervous hands. A Mrs. Hale, my mother sent me. She says please come. It's important. Ruth followed the boy through back alleys she'd never walked. They arrived at the small laundry, where Mrs. Chen waited with anxious eyes. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman began in careful English. But I must tell someone. Your husband, he helped us. Now he is gone. And I fear... What did Samuel help you with? Mrs. Chen glanced around nervously. My husband's papers. For the railroad work. Mr. Pike, he holds them. Says we owe money we already paid. The Reverend, he was trying to get them back. Ruth's pulse quickened. Do you have receipts, proof of payment? Had, but men came, took everything, said it was railroad property. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. Without papers, My husband cannot work. Without work. Ruth understood. She'd seen other families forced out when the breadwinner couldn't find employment. When did the men come? 2 weeks ago, just before Reverend got sick. The timing made Ruth's stomach turn. She pressed the woman's hands. I'll see what I can do. Samuel kept records. Maybe there's something... Hope flickered in Mrs. Chen's face. You are kind, like him. Ruth walked back slowly, mind racing. The railroad? Pike. Samuel's notation in the ledger. Pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. At the house, she found Quinn on the porch with his torn shirt. She invited him in, grateful for the company as she worked. He sat at the kitchen table while she threaded her needle. The Chen family, she said carefully. Do you know them? Seen them around. Good people, hard workers. Pike's holding their papers, work documents for the railroad. Quinn's hand stilled on his coffee cup. That's so. Ruth focused on her stitching. Samuel wrote something in his ledger. The railroad comes, God help us all. What do you think he meant? Could mean lots of things. Railroad brings progress, also brings men who'd sell their souls for profit. Or men who'd steal souls that aren't for sale. Quinn watched her work. You're thinking Pike's involved in something bigger than church finances. I'm thinking Samuel died very conveniently for someone. Ruth bit off the thread. There. Good as new. Quinn examined her work. You've got skilled hands. I've had practice. Mended clothes since I was young. She hesitated. It's how Samuel found me. Working in a boarding house in Tucson. The owner had plans for me. Plans that didn't involve needlework. Samuel saved you. He offered me a bargain. Marriage in name. Protection, in fact. I'd keep his house. He'd keep his reputation as a family man. Ruth smoothed the repaired fabric. It wasn't what either of us wanted, but it was better than the alternatives. Quinn put on the shirt, fingers working the buttons. Must have been lonely. Less lonely than what came before. Ruth stood, busying herself with clearing the table. Would you like some dinner I've made too much for one? I'd like that. They ate in comfortable quiet, outside. The promised clouds darkened, bringing the smell of rain. Ruth found herself stealing glances at Quinn, the way he held his spoon, the careful way he chewed, like a man who'd learned not to take meals for granted. Tell me about the railroad, she said finally. Quinn set down his spoon. What about it? When's it coming through? Samuel never said, but Pike seems mighty interested. Word is within the year. Southern Pacific's pushing hard to connect California to Texas. Quinn's expression grew thoughtful. Town like this, sitting on good water. Railroad could make it rich. Or make someone rich. That too. Ruth rose to light the lamp. As she did, something Samuel once said came back to her. He preached about it once, the lamp under a bushel. Said some folks hide their light because they're afraid of being seen. Others hide it because they're afraid of what the light might reveal. Which were you? Ruth considered. Both, I suppose. Still am. And Pike, what's he hiding? Everything, I think, but I can't prove it without... She stopped. Without the ledger. Ruth met his eyes. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Quinn leaned back. Here's what I see. Pike's been squeezing folks like the Chens, taking their money, their papers, their dignity. Your husband found out, started keeping records. Then, convenient-like, he gets sick. You're saying Pike murdered him? I'm saying fever's not the only thing that can burn a man up. Quinn's face was grim. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Ruth turned to the window. The first drops of rain struck the glass. What can I do? I'm a widow with no standing, no family, no proof that would hold up against Pike's word. You've got the ledger, which I can't reveal without putting myself in danger. You're already in danger. Quinn stood. moving closer. They searched your house. They'll search again. And when they don't find what they're looking for, they'll assume I destroyed it. Or that you're planning to use it. His voice softened. Ruth, you can't stay here. Not even 3 more days. Where would I go? I have enough money for stage fare. Nothing more. Quinn was quiet for a moment. Then, I know some folks in Prescott. Good people who could use help. Board and wages for honest work. Why would you do that for me? He turned away. Maybe I got tired of seeing good people ground down. Maybe I like your coffee. Does it matter? Ruth studied his profile in the lamplight. Everyone wants something. Mr. Quinn, what do you want? He faced her then, and she saw something raw in his eyes. Right now, I want to see you safe. The rest can wait. The rain came harder, drumming on the roof. Ruth became aware of how close they stood, of the heat radiating from his body. She should step back, should remember propriety, her position, the watching town. Instead, she reached up and touched the scar on his jaw. How did you get this? His breath caught. Difference of opinion with a man in Tombstone. About what? Whether a woman deserved respect regardless of her circumstances. Ruth's hand trembled. And who won? I'm standing here. He isn't. The words should have frightened her. Instead, she felt something unlock in her chest, a door she'd barred since the day she'd traded freedom for safety. Jonah, she whispered. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest. She felt his heartbeat, quick and strong. Don't, not unless you mean it. I don't know what I mean anymore. The words came out broken. Samuel's dead. The town hates me, and I'm so tired of being careful. Quinn's other hand rose to cup her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Gentle as summer rain. Being careful's kept you alive. Alive isn't living. He made a sound part laugh, part groan. You're going to be the death of me. Ruth Hale. Is that what you're afraid of, death? No. His forehead touched hers. I'm afraid of wanting something I can't have. Of staying when I should go. Of making promises I can't keep. Ruth closed her eyes. Then don't make promises. Just be here, now. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended. Then Quinn kissed her soft, careful, like she might break. Ruth had never been kissed before. Samuel's dry pecks on her cheek didn't count. This was different. This was fire. She made a small sound, and Quinn started to pull back, but Ruth caught his shirt, holding him close. The second kiss was less careful. It tasted of coffee and possibility, of loneliness ended and risks worth taking. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Ruth's lips felt swollen, alive. She touched them in wonder. I should go, Quinn said roughly. Yes. Neither moved. The rain pounded harder, sealing them in this moment. Ruth knew she should feel shame. A widow of 5 days, kissing a stranger in her dead husband's house, but all she felt was awake brilliantly, terrifyingly awake. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by thunder that shook the windows. In that brief, white moment, Ruth saw Quinn's face clearly, the want, the conflict, the iron control. The storm's getting worse, she said. I've ridden through worse. Your horse is already stabled. It would be foolish to go out in this. Quinn's jaw tightened. Ruth? The barn, she said quickly. There's hay in the loft, dry and warm, just until the storm passes. He searched her face. Just the storm. Ruth couldn't answer that. Didn't trust herself to. I'll get you a blanket. She fled to the bedroom, pressing her burning face against the cool wall. What was she doing? What had she already done? When she returned with the blanket, Quinn stood by the door, hat in hand. He took the blanket with steady hands, though she saw the effort it cost him. Lock up behind me, he said. And Ruth, whatever happens, keep that ledger safe. It's more important than you know." After he left, Ruth stood in the empty kitchen. Her lips still tingled. Her whole body felt electric, charged by more than the storm. She touched the table where they'd shared meals, the chair where he'd sat. Such ordinary things, transformed by his presence, by what had passed between them. A sound made her turn. There, pressed against the kitchen window, a face. Tom Garrett, rain streaming down his features, eyes wild with fury. He'd seen, God help her, he'd seen everything. The face disappeared. Ruth ran to the door, checking the lock twice. Her hands shook as she extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, she heard voices outside, muffled by rain but unmistakably angry. Pike's men, gathering like wolves. Ruth clutched the blanket she'd meant for Quinn. Mind racing. The ledger. They'd come for it now, using what Garrett had seen as excuse to tear her life apart. She had to hide it better. Had to. A soft knock at the back door froze her blood. Then Quinn's voice. Urgent. "Ruth, open up, now!" She fumbled with the lock. Quinn slipped inside, water streaming from his coat. "They're coming," he said. "At least 4 of them. We need to go." "Go where?" "Anywhere but here." He gripped her shoulders. "Get the ledger. We're leaving. Tonight." Ruth's world tilted. Everything she'd built, everything Samuel had protected gone in a moment's decision. But as lightning flashed again, illuminating Quinn's determined face, she realized the decision had already been made. Made when she'd opened her door to a drifter. Made when she'd shared her table. Made when she'd touched his scar and tasted possibility on his lips. "The rose bush," she said. "It's under the rose bush." Quinn nodded once. "Get your things. Only what you can carry. I'll get the ledger." Ruth ran to her room, hands flying as she packed. Samuel's Bible, her few clothes, the small purse of coins that was all her wealth. Thunder crashed overhead as she returned to find Quinn in the kitchen, the oilcloth bundle in his hands. "Ready?" he asked. Ruth looked around the little house one last time, at Samuel's books, his chair, the life she'd tried to build on sand. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." Quinn took her hand. "Then let's go. Storm will cover our tracks, but not for long." They slipped out the back as the front door shook under heavy fists. Into the storm. Into the night. Into whatever came next. Behind them, she heard wood splinter as Pike's men broke through, but Ruth didn't look back. Her hand in Quinn's, the ledger between them. She ran toward a future uncertain as lightning, wild as desert rain. The lamp under the bushel had finally been overturned. Now they'd see what light it cast. The abandoned mine shaft provided poor shelter, but it was better than the storm. Ruth huddled against the timber wall, her dress soaked through, watching Quinn build a small fire from scraps of wood. They'd run for an hour through the desert, the ledger wrapped in her shawl to keep it dry. "They'll search the roads first," Quinn said, coaxing flame from damp kindling. "Then the stage stops. We've got maybe until dawn before they think to check the old mines." Ruth wrung water from her hair. "What then?" "Then we need to be somewhere else." He fed the fire carefully. "Can you ride?" "I haven't in years." "You'll remember." The fire caught properly, casting dancing shadows on the mine walls. "Come closer. Need to get warm." Ruth moved near the flames, grateful for the heat. Quinn shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and rain. "The ledger," she said. "We should look at it properly." Quinn retrieved the oilcloth bundle. Together they unwrapped it, revealing Samuel's careful records. In the firelight, the columns of numbers told their damning story. "Here," Ruth pointed to an entry. "Pike collected $500 for church construction, but look, only $200 went to materials. The rest listed as administrative costs." Ruth turned pages. "It happens over and over. Donations for the poor, construction funds, missionary collections all skimmed. Quinn studied another page. These aren't just church funds. Look at this water rights documentation fee. That's town business. Ruth found more entries: fees for filing claims, charges for document storage, taxes that should have gone to the county, all flowing into Pike's pockets. But this, Quinn pointed to a section near the back, this is different. The entries changed in the last month of Samuel's life. Instead of numbers, he'd written names: Chen, Morrison, Vasquez, Williams, beside each. Cryptic notes, papers taken, deed questioned, water blocked. He was documenting something else, Ruth said, not just theft. Quinn's expression darkened. Land grab. Pike's positioning for when the railroad comes. By destroying people's proof of ownership. Exactly, no papers, no claim. When Southern Pacific arrives, Pike owns half the town. Quinn sat back. Your husband figured it out. Ruth touched Samuel's final entry, dated 2 days before he fell ill. Meeting with Judge Carter in Prescott. Evidence ready. May God forgive us all. He never made it to Prescott, she whispered. No, he didn't. They sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what they held. Not just evidence of theft, but of a conspiracy that reached deep into Cedar Springs' foundations. There's something else, Ruth said. She showed Quinn a sealed envelope tucked into the ledger's back cover. I haven't opened it. It felt private. Quinn handed her his knife. Only one way to know. Ruth slit the envelope carefully. Inside, Samuel's spidery handwriting covered 2 pages. My dearest Ruth, she read aloud. If you are reading this, then my fears have come to pass. I am sorry for the burden I leave you, but there is no one else I trust. Her voice caught. Quinn moved closer, not touching but present. I have discovered that Abram Pike is not merely a thief, but a murderer. The fire that killed the Martinez family last winter was no accident. They refused to sell their water rights. The fever that took John Chen poison, I believe, though I cannot prove it. Others have died or disappeared. All who stood in Pike's way. Ruth's hands trembled. Quinn steadied them with his own. I fear I am next. I have been careful, but Pike grows suspicious. I should have acted sooner, but I was afraid for myself, for you, for our arrangement that gave us both shelter from the world's cruelties. Tears blurred Ruth's vision. She blinked them away, continuing. You must take this ledger to Judge Carter in Prescott. He is expecting it, though he does not know from whom. Trust no one in Cedar Springs. The rot goes deep. Sheriff Watson, Mayor Webb, perhaps others. Webb, Quinn muttered. That explains why his boy was so scared. Ruth read on. I know I failed you as a husband. We married for protection, not love. And I kept you caged by propriety when your spirit yearned to soar. But know this, you brought light to my final months. Your kindness, your strength, your music when you thought I couldn't hear. You deserved better than an old man's bargain. She had to stop, throat too tight for words. Quinn took the letter gently, reading the final paragraph. The depot master, Silas Ford, bears a tattoo on his left wrist, a star with 5 points. I've seen this mark before. On wanted posters from Kansas. He and Pike knew each other there. I'm certain. Be careful of him especially. May God keep you safe. My dear girl. With respect and true affection, Samuel. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Ruth wiped her eyes with Quinn's coat sleeve. He knew, she said. All along, he knew what Pike was. And stayed to document it. That took courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same. Quinn refolded the letter. This changes things. It's not just about money anymore. What do you mean? Quinn's face was grave. That tattoo Samuel mentioned, I've seen it too. Not in Kansas, in Missouri. Gang called themselves the Star Riders. Train robbers. Mostly, but mean as snakes. If Ford's one of them, then Pike brought him here for a reason. The railroad. They're not just positioning to buy land, they're planning something bigger. Quinn stood, pacing the small space. When did Southern Pacific announce the route? Ruth thought back. 2 months ago, Samuel was excited at first, said it would bring prosperity. 2 months. Quinn did calculations in his head. Takes time to plan a big job. Gather men, scout locations. You think they mean to rob the railroad? I think they mean to do whatever makes them richest. Buy up land cheap. Maybe hit the construction payroll when it comes through. Either way, a sound outside made them both freeze. Voices, distant but carrying in the desert night. Quinn doused the fire instantly, plunging them into darkness. He found Ruth's hand, pulling her deeper into the mine. Said they came this way. The voice was muffled but recognizable. Tom Garrett. Check every shaft, another voice ordered. Pike himself. They can't have gotten far. Quinn and Ruth pressed against the cave wall. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure they'd hear it. Quinn's hand found her face in the dark, finger pressed to her lips. The voices came closer. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside their shelter. Ruth held her breath. This one's flooded, Garrett called. They wouldn't go in there. Check it anyway. Light flickered at the mine entrance, a torch. Ruth pressed her face into Quinn's shoulder, willing herself invisible. The light swept the entrance, paused, moved on. Footsteps retreated. Nothing here, Garrett reported. Maybe they doubled back to town. Maybe. Pike sounded unconvinced. Keep searching. They have something I need. The voices faded gradually. Ruth and Quinn remained frozen for long minutes after, afraid to move or speak. Finally, Quinn whispered. We need to go. They'll widen the search at daylight. Where? There's a way station about 10 miles north. Man there owes me a favor. We can get horses, supplies. They crept from the mine into pre-dawn darkness. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean. Stars wheeled overhead, brilliant in the clear air. Quinn led the way, sure-footed despite the darkness. Ruth followed, clutching the ledger, Samuel's letter burning in her mind. They walked in silence for an hour before Quinn spoke. That kiss, back at the house, I shouldn't have. Don't, Ruth's voice was firm. Don't apologize for the one true thing that happened in that place. He stopped, turning to face her. In the starlight, his expression was unreadable. Ruth, I'm not sorry, she said. I'm tired and scared and my feet hurt, but I'm not sorry. Are you? No, the word came rough. But you deserve better than a drifter with blood on his hands. I deserve to choose for myself. Ruth lifted her chin. Samuel chose for me. Pike wants to choose for me. For once, I want to decide my own path. Quinn studied her for a long moment. Then he took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Then choose. But choose knowing who I am, what I am. Tell me. They walked on, and Quinn spoke of a boy who lost his family to raiders, of a young man who learned to shoot to survive, of jobs taken for money, others for justice, some for reasons he couldn't name. I've killed men, he said quietly. Not for sport, not for pleasure, but I've done it. That changes a person. Samuel killed men in the war. He never spoke of it, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes. Ruth squeezed Quinn's hand. You're not telling me anything that changes my mind. What about Ford the Star Riders? Quinn's pace slowed. Different story. I tracked them for a while. Personal reasons. They hit a train outside Independence, killed everyone aboard, including... He stopped. Ruth waited. Including my sister. She was traveling to her wedding. The words came hard. I hunted them for 2 years, got most of them. Ford slipped away. And now he's here. Now he's here. Quinn's voice held iron. Which means this isn't just about you anymore. They reached the way station as dawn broke. It was little more than a shack and corral. But the old man who ran it greeted Quinn warmly. Jonah been too long. His eyes shifted to Ruth, curious but polite. Ma'am? Bill, we need help. Quinn was direct. 2 horses, supplies for a week, and silence. Bill studied them both, noting Ruth's torn dress, the carefully wrapped bundle she carried. Trouble. The kind that spreads if not stopped. Pike. Quinn nodded. Bill spat in the dust. That snake's had it coming. Take what you need. While Quinn selected horses, Bill brought Ruth inside. His wife, a sturdy woman named Agnes, clucked over her state. You're the preacher's widow, Agnes said, providing clean clothes and hot water. Heard about his passing. Good man. Yes, he was. Agnes helped her change, asking no questions about her midnight flight. The simple traveling dress was worn but clean, better suited for riding than her widow's weeds. My daughter's, Agnes explained. She's married in Tucson now. Won't miss it. I'll pay you when I can. Hush. Payment enough to see Pike get his due. Agnes's face hardened. He tried to take our water rights last year, said we hadn't filed proper. Reverend Hale helped us prove otherwise. Another piece of Samuel's hidden work. Ruth wondered how many others he'd quietly aided. Outside, Quinn had 2 horses saddled and packed. He helped Ruth mount, hands gentle on her waist. The contact sent warmth through her despite everything. Remember how? He asked. Ruth settled into the saddle, body remembering lessons from childhood. I think so. Good. We ride hard until noon, then rest through the heat. Should make Prescott by tomorrow night. Bill handed up a rifle. For the road. Quinn nodded thanks. To Ruth, he said. Ready. Ruth looked back at the way station, at the mine-dotted hills beyond. Somewhere out there, Pike searched, but ahead lay Prescott, Judge Carter, and justice for Samuel. I'm ready. They rode into the rising sun, the ledger secure in Ruth's saddlebags. Behind them, dust clouds suggested pursuit, but Ruth didn't look back. She'd spent months hiding her light under Samuel's careful bushel. Now, with the wind in her hair, and Quinn beside her, she let it blaze free. Pike had made a mistake. He'd threatened a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. He'd murdered a good man who'd spent his last days seeking justice. And he'd brought Jonah Quinn back into her life, a man hunting his own ghosts, whose kiss had awakened something fierce and bright within her. The desert stretched wide before them, dangerous and beautiful. Ruth gripped the reins tighter and followed Quinn into the unknown. Samuel's evidence safe in her keeping. The truth would out. Justice would come. And perhaps, in the seeking of it, she'd find what had always eluded her, a life lived on her own terms, a love chosen freely, a light that needed no bushel to contain its flame. The sun climbed higher, and they rode on. The smoke was visible from a mile away, a black column rising against the evening sky. Ruth's heart sank as they crested the ridge. Below, the Chen family's laundry burned, flames eating through the wooden structure with terrible hunger. No, she breathed. Quinn spurred his horse forward. They'd been riding hard all day, planning to skirt Cedar Springs entirely, but the fire had drawn them like moths, and now Ruth understood why. People formed bucket lines from the well, but it was too late. The building was gone, reduced to a skeleton of blazing timbers. Mrs. Chen stood with her children, watching their livelihood disappear. Ruth dismounted before Quinn could stop her. She pushed through the crowd, reaching the Chen family. Is anyone hurt? Mrs. Chen's face was streaked with soot and tears. We got out, but everything is gone. When did it start? 2 hours ago. Very fast. Too fast. Ben Chen, the boy who'd fetched Ruth just days ago, pointed to the alley. I saw men running. Sheriff Watson appeared, notebook in hand. His expression was carefully neutral. Accidents happen. These old buildings, all that starch and heat. This was no accident, Ruth said. Watson's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Hale, heard you'd left town sudden-like, with property missing from the parsonage. The only thing missing is justice for... Quinn's hand on her shoulder stopped her. He dismounted quietly, keeping his hat low. Sheriff's right. Dangerous business, laundries, all those chemicals. Watson studied Quinn with suspicion. Don't believe we've met proper... Mr. Johnson, Quinn lied smoothly. Just passing through. Shame about the fire. A commotion near the crowd drew their attention. Pike emerged from the gathering darkness, Webb and Garrett flanking him. His eyes found Ruth immediately. Mrs. Hale, his voice carried over the crackling flames. What a surprise. We've been looking for you. I'm sure you have. There are questions about missing church property, documents that belong to the congregation. Pike moved closer. Serious accusations have been made. Ruth felt the crowd's attention shift to her. These people knew her, had judged her for months. Would they listen now? The only documents I have are my husband's personal papers, she said clearly. His journal, his last words to me. Those belong to the church. His private thoughts belong to the church. Ruth let disbelief color her voice. His letters to his wife. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pike's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, you fled in the night, broke into church property. I fled because men broke into my home. Ruth's voice rose. Because I feared for my safety. Because this town has made clear I'm not welcome. You kissed a stranger in your husband's house. Garrett burst out. I saw... You saw a frightened widow accept comfort from a kind man. Ruth lifted her chin. Is that a crime now? Is grief only acceptable when performed to your standards? More murmurs. Some of the women looked uncomfortable. Martha Perkins wouldn't meet her eyes. Quinn stepped forward slightly. Perhaps this isn't the place. No, Ruth said. Let them accuse me here, in front of everyone. Let them explain why a widow can't leave town without permission. Why she can't take her husband's journal with her. Pike's face darkened. You took more than a journal. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air. Around them. The fire crackled lower. The building collapsing into itself. Mrs. Chen wept silently, her dreams turning to ash. Search her, Pike ordered Watson. The sheriff hesitated. Now, Abram, I can't just... She's a suspected thief. Search her or I'll have the town council review your position. Watson's face went red, but he stepped toward Ruth. Quinn moved to intervene, but Ruth stopped him with a look. Go ahead, she told Watson. Search me, here, in front of everyone. Show them what Cedar Springs has become. Watson's hands shook as he patted her pockets, checked her small bag. He found nothing, of course. The ledger was hidden in Quinn's saddlebags, wrapped in oilcloth and buried under supplies. Nothing, Watson reported, relief evident. Pike's eyes glittered. Check the horses. That's enough. A new voice joined the conversation. Judge Carter stepped from the crowd, his presence commanding despite his small stature. This is shameful. Pike. Ruth's heart leaped. The judge, Samuel's contact, but how is he here? Judge. Pike recovered quickly. This is a matter of church property, which falls under legal jurisdiction if theft is alleged. Carter's eyes were cold. Do you have evidence witnesses, or just the word of men who break into widows' homes at night? She fled, as was her right. Is Cedar Springs a prison now? Are widows required to stay for your approval? The crowd stirred uneasily. Ruth saw doubt creeping into faces that had shown only suspicion before. "Your Honor," Ruth said carefully, "I came into possession of some documents my husband wanted you to see, personal observations about irregularities he'd noticed." Carter's expression didn't change, but she saw understanding in his eyes. "Indeed. Then perhaps we should discuss this privately. My office in Prescott would be more appropriate than this circus." "She's not going anywhere," Pike snarled. "I beg your pardon." Carter's voice could have frozen fire. "Are you attempting to obstruct justice, Mr. Pike?" For the first time, Pike looked uncertain. Behind him, Ford had appeared the depot master with the Star Rider tattoo. He whispered urgently in Pike's ear. Ruth caught Quinn's eye. He'd seen Ford too, his hand drifting toward his gun. "Perhaps we've all gotten overheated," Mayor Webb interjected nervously. "The fire, the excitement, Mrs. Hale, if you'd agree to stay in town tonight, we could sort this out properly tomorrow." "Mrs. Hale will stay wherever she chooses," Carter said. "And if I hear of any harassment, I'll return with federal marshals. Is that clear?" The threat landed. Pike's face went white, then red. "This isn't over." "No," Ruth agreed. "It's not." She turned to Mrs. Chen, pressing the woman's hands. "This wasn't an accident. Don't let them tell you it was." "Mrs." Chen nodded through her tears. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, whispers following like smoke. Ruth heard her name, Samuel's, questions about what he might have known. Seeds of doubt planted in scorched earth. Quinn brought the horses closer. "We should go." But Ruth wasn't done. She faced the remaining crowd, raising her voice. "My husband died trying to protect this town. He saw what was happening, the fees, the seized papers, the fires. He documented it all." "Lies," Pike spat. "Then let Judge Carter investigate. Let him examine the church books, the town records. If there's nothing to hide, what's the harm?" "The woman's hysterical with grief," Webb started. "The woman," Ruth interrupted, "is right here. And she's not hysterical. She's angry. There's a difference." She mounted her horse with Quinn's help, looking down at the assembled faces, some hostile, some confused, just a few beginning to wonder. "Samuel used to preach about light and darkness," she said, "about how darkness hates the light because it exposes what's hidden. I think he understood that better than any of us." Without waiting for response, she turned her horse. Quinn and Judge Carter followed, leaving the burned laundry and the bitter crowd behind. They rode in tense silence until they'd cleared the town limits. Then Carter spoke. "That was brave, Mrs. Hale. Also foolish. They burned the Chens out. How many others before I could reach you?" "Fair point." Carter studied her. "You have the documents Reverend Hale mentioned?" Ruth glanced at Quinn, who nodded slightly. "Yes." "Good. We'll need—" Carter stopped, holding up a hand. "Listen. Hoofbeats. Coming fast from town." "Ride," Quinn ordered. "Now." They spurred their horses into the darkness. Behind them, the hoofbeats multiplied. Pike wasn't waiting for legal niceties. "This way." Quinn led them off the main road. Into the rough country he knew better than maps could teach. They rode hard, branches whipping past, stones scattering under hooves. Ruth clung to her saddle, trusting Quinn's path beside her. Carter rode with surprising skill for a town judge. The pursuit sounds faded, but Quinn didn't slow. They rode for another hour through increasingly rough terrain before he finally called a halt in a box canyon. "We'll rest here. Few hours, no more." They dismounted on shaking legs. Ruth's whole body ached, but she was alive. The ledger was safe. Carter accepted water from Quinn's canteen. "Well, this is more excitement than I usually see in a year." "Why were you in Cedar Springs?" Ruth asked. Your husband sent word he had evidence of corruption. When he died so suddenly, I grew suspicious, decided to investigate personally. Carter's face was grave. I didn't expect Pike to move so boldly. He's desperate. Quinn said, "The railroad's coming. Whatever scheme he's running, it has to complete before outside authorities arrive with the construction crews." "The Star Riders?" Ruth added quietly. "One of them is here, Silas Ford." Carter's eyes sharpened. "You're certain?" Quinn rolled up his sleeve, revealing an old scar. "Railroad agents marked me 2 years ago. Hunting the gang. I know their sign. Ford's one of them." "Then this is bigger than land fraud." Carter began pacing. "If Pike's allied with train robbers, they're planning something," Ruth said. Samuel was sure of it. They made cold camp, not risking a fire. Ruth found herself sitting close to Quinn, drawing comfort from his presence. The night sounds of the desert surrounded them: coyotes, wind, the small movements of hunting creatures. "You did good back there," Quinn said softly. "Made them think. Made them angry." "Sometimes that's the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. "That wasn't how I wanted to tell you." Ruth knew he meant his past, the Star Riders, his hunt for vengeance. "Would you have told me?" "Yes, when we were safe, when I could explain properly." "I don't need explanations." "Jonah!" She found his hand in the darkness. "I need truth. You've given me that." His fingers tightened on hers. "There's more. Things I've done." "That brought you here. To this moment. To helping me." Ruth turned to face him, though she could barely see his features. "Samuel used to say God works in mysterious ways. Maybe you're my mysterious way." Quinn made a sound that might have been a laugh or something else. "Never been called that before." "Mrs. Hale." Carter interrupted gently. "Perhaps you should rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." But Ruth couldn't rest. The image of the burning laundry haunted her. How many others would Pike destroy before they could stop him? "Judge," she said, "what can you actually do even with the ledger?" Carter sighed. "Legally open an investigation. Issue warrants. But that takes time. And Pike knows it. He'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses. Or worse," Quinn added grimly. "We need more than the ledger." Ruth realized. "We need witnesses willing to testify, people ready to stand up. After tonight, they'll be too frightened." "Some will." Ruth thought of Timothy Webb at the organ, of Mrs. Chen's quiet strength, of others Samuel had helped. But some might find courage if they knew they weren't alone. "What are you suggesting?" Ruth stood, pacing like Carter had. "Pike rules through fear and isolation. People think they're alone in their suffering. But what if they knew others felt the same? What if we could gather them?" "A town meeting without Pike's control," Carter considered. "It's possible, but dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now." Ruth faced them both. "Samuel died for this truth. The Chens lost everything. How many more before we act?" Quinn rose, checking his weapons. "She's right. Pike's escalating. That fire wasn't just intimidation, it was elimination. He'll do worse if cornered." "Then we corner him first," Ruth said. "On our terms." Carter studied them, both the widow and the gunman, unlikely allies in pursuit of justice. "You realize what you're asking. Pike has money, men, connections. We have a ledger and accusations. We have the truth. The truth doesn't stop bullets, Mrs. Hale." "No," Quinn said quietly. "But men who believe in truth do." A sound made them all freeze horses, moving carefully through the rocks. Quinn drew his gun, pushing Ruth behind him. "3 riders," he whispered. "Maybe 4. They waited, tense as drawn wire. The sounds came closer, paused, continued past. After long minutes, Quinn relaxed slightly. Searching, not tracking, They don't know where we are, yet. We can't stay here, Carter said. No, we ride at first light. Push hard for Prescott. Quinn looked at Ruth. Can you make it? I'll make it. She would, too, for Samuel, for the Chens, for all of Pike's victims, and for herself, the woman she was becoming with each mile from Cedar Springs. Quinn squeezed her shoulder. Try to sleep. I'll keep watch. Ruth lay down on the hard ground, using her coat as a pillow. Above, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles. But she wasn't indifferent. Not anymore. The fire that Pike had meant to destroy the Chens had instead lit something in her, a determination that burned hotter than fear. Tomorrow they'd reach Prescott, begin the real fight. But tonight, with Quinn standing guard and truth on their side, Ruth allowed herself a moment of something like peace. The lamp was no longer hidden. Now they'd see how bright it could burn. Sleep took her as the desert wind sang through the rocks, carrying the scent of smoke and distant rain. In her dreams, Samuel smiled and said, Well done, my dear girl. Well done. Dawn came pale and cold to the box canyon. Ruth woke to find Quinn's coat draped over her, though he stood watch at the canyon mouth without it. Judge Carter was already awake, studying Samuel's ledger by the early light. Mrs. Hale, Carter said quietly. There's something here you should see. Ruth joined him, wrapping Quinn's coat tighter against the morning chill. Carter pointed to a page near the back one she'd skimmed past in their hurried examination. These entries from last month. Your husband wrote, SF meeting star confirmed. Then here, 2 days later, poison in the well. God forgive me for my silence. Ruth's blood chilled. Poison. The Hendricks family. Carter continued. Their baby died of fever last month. 3 other children in that neighborhood fell ill. The well, Ruth breathed. They all used the same well, which Pike's men condemned the next week. Said it was contaminated. Carter's face was grim. But what if it was contaminated deliberately? Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth. Babies. Pike had poisoned babies to drive families from their land. There's more. Carter said, This symbol here, Samuel drew it several times. A star with a circle. Know what it means? Quinn had approached silently. Now he answered, Rally sign. The Star Riders used it to mark meeting places. Samuel found one of their marks, Ruth realized. Hef Silas Ford. He was tracking their movements. This date, Quinn pointed. 3 weeks from now. That's when something's planned. Carter closed the ledger carefully. We need to reach Prescott. Today. I'll wire for federal marshals. No time, Quinn interrupted. Pike knows we have evidence. He'll accelerate whatever he's planning. They broke camp quickly, Ruth's mind spinning with the new revelations. Poisoned wells, murdered babies. How deep did the evil run? They rode hard as the sun climbed. Ruth's body protested every mile, but she didn't complain. The memory of those sick children drove her forward. Midday brought them to a creek crossing. As the horses drank, Quinn scouted ahead. He returned with a frown. Fresh tracks, maybe 6 riders, heading north. Toward Prescott, Carter asked. Or to cut us off from it. Quinn studied the sky. Storm building to the west might help hide us. They pushed on, but within an hour. Quinn's prediction proved true. Not about the storm, about the ambush. The first shot cracked across the desert, sending rock chips flying near Ruth's head. Quinn reacted instantly, grabbing her horse's reins and spurring both animals toward a cluster of boulders. Down, he shouted, pulling Ruth from her saddle as more shots rang out. Carter tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. Quinn dragged both Ruth and the judge behind cover as bullets whined overhead. Ruth's heart hammered as she pressed against the warm stone. How bad? Quinn asked Carter. Flesh wound. I'll live. The judge was pale but determined. How many? Quinn peered around the boulder. 4, maybe 5, spread in a half circle. Pike's men. Has to be. Quinn checked his ammunition. Ruth, can you shoot? Samuel taught me. Her voice came steadier than she felt. Quinn passed her his rifle. Don't waste shots. Only fire if you have a clear target. He moved to another position, drawing their fire. Ruth saw a man shift from cover and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard, but her shot struck true. The man yelped and ducked back. Good girl. Quinn called, then louder. That you, Garrett Pike, must be desperate, sending you boys out here. Just want the woman. Garrett's voice echoed off the rocks. Send her out. You and the judge can go. Interesting offer. Quinn replied, Here's mine. You boys ride off now. I might forget I saw you. Otherwise, well, he fired. His shot taking the hat off a man who'd peered too far from cover. Ruth helped Carter bind his shoulder. The judge's face was gray with pain, but his eyes stayed sharp. They can keep us pinned until dark, he said quietly. Ruth knew what that meant. Pike would have time to destroy evidence. Silence witnesses. Everything Samuel died for would be lost. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming, but not fast enough. Quinn, she called. What if I... No. His response was immediate. Whatever you're thinking, no. But Ruth had already made up her mind. She thought of the poisoned children, the burned laundry, Samuel's quiet courage. Judge, that document case, is it waterproof? Carter understood immediately. No, Mrs. Hale, absolutely not. But Ruth was already moving. She grabbed the ledger, stuffing it into the case along with Samuel's letter. If something happens, you get this to the authorities. Promise me. Ruth? Quinn started toward her, but gunfire drove him back. She pressed the case into Carter's hands. Then, before anyone could stop her, she stood and stepped into the open. I'm here, she called. Let the others go, and I'll come willing. The firing stopped. Ruth walked forward slowly, hands visible. She heard Quinn cursing behind her, Carter calling her name. Garrett emerged from cover, gun trained on her. That's far enough. Where's the ledger? Hidden. I'll take you to it. Ruth, no. Quinn's voice was anguished. She didn't look back. Couldn't, or she'd lose her nerve. More men appeared, 4 total, all armed. But Ruth was counting on something Pike's men didn't know. The storm wasn't the only thing coming. Move, Garrett ordered, gesturing with his gun. Ruth took another step. Thunder cracked overhead, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. That's when she saw him, a 5th man. Rifle aimed not at her, but at the rocks where Quinn and Carter hid. Ford. The Star Rider had circled behind. Quinn, she screamed. Behind you! Everything happened at once. Quinn spun, firing as Ford's shot rang out. Ruth dropped flat as Garrett's attention wavered. Carter, wounded shoulder and all, raised a hidden derringer and put a bullet in the nearest attacker. The storm broke in earnest, rain sheeting down. In the chaos of water and gunfire, Ruth crawled toward a small ravine. Garrett spotted her, swinging his gun back. The shot that saved her life came from an unexpected direction. Timothy Webb stood on a ridge, his father's hunting rifle smoking. The boy's face was pale but determined. Garrett's shot went wide. Quinn's didn't. The man fell and didn't rise. Timothy, get down! Ruth shouted. More riders appeared, but these wore badges, federal marshals, led by a grizzled man who took in the scene with practiced eyes. Judge Carter, he called. Got your wire yesterday. Figured you might need help. The remaining attackers threw down their weapons. Ford tried to run, but Quinn was faster. The 2 men collided, rolling in the mud. Ford pulled a knife, But Quinn had lived too long with vengeance to die now. When they separated, Ford lay still. Ruth found herself on her knees in the rain, shaking. Strong arms pulled her up Quinn, muddy and bleeding from a cut on his cheek, but alive. "Don't ever," he said roughly, "do that again." "I had to. They would have kept us pinned." He kissed her, cutting off words. It was desperate, relieved, tasting of rain and fear and something deeper. When they parted, Ruth saw everything in his eyes: terror at almost losing her, admiration for her courage, and something that might have been love. "The boy," she said, "Timothy." They found him with the marshals, wrapped in a blanket. Mayor Webb was there too, face haggard. "My son left a note," Webb said quietly. "Told me everything, about Pike's threats, the money, what they did to families who wouldn't sell." His voice broke. "I was a coward. But Timothy, he said the Reverend taught him about standing for truth." Ruth touched the boy's shoulder. "Samuel would be proud." "Is it over?" Timothy asked. The marshal answered, "Got enough here to arrest Pike and anyone else involved. Judge's evidence plus these men." He nodded to the captured attackers. "They'll talk to save their necks." Ruth retrieved the document case from Carter, who, despite his wound, was already organizing the legal response. The ledger was safe, Samuel's evidence intact. As they prepared to ride for Prescott, Ruth looked back at the battlefield. Rain had washed the blood away, but not the memory. "He knew," she said to Quinn. "Samuel knew it might cost him his life, but he gathered the evidence anyway." "He was a brave man." "He was terrified," Ruth corrected. "He told me once courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Quinn took her hand. "What happens now after Prescott?" Ruth considered. The widow's weeds were ruined, the proper life she'd built in Cedar Springs' ashes. But standing in the rain, surrounded by proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, she felt freer than ever. "I don't know," she admitted. "For the first time in my life, I don't know what comes next." "That scare you?" Ruth smiled. "Terrifies me, but Samuel taught me something about that too." They mounted up, Ruth riding beside Quinn as the marshals led their prisoners toward justice. The storm was passing, leaving the desert washed clean behind them. Timothy Webb rode with his father, both finding redemption in truth finally spoken. "What about you?" Ruth asked Quinn. "Ford's dead. Your vendetta's finished." Quinn was quiet for a long moment. "Been chasing ghosts so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to protect instead of pursue." He looked at her. "Maybe it's time I remembered." "Maybe it is." They rode on through the breaking storm. Ahead lay Prescott. Testimony. The dismantling of Pike's empire. But Ruth found herself thinking beyond that to possibilities Samuel's death had unexpectedly opened. A life chosen freely. A love born of crisis but tempered by choice. A future written by her own hand. The lamp burned bright now, no bushel to contain it, and in its light, Ruth saw the path ahead uncertain but hers to walk. "Thank you," she told Quinn, "for keeping watch, for fighting, for kissing you in the rain." Despite everything, Ruth laughed. "That too." "My pleasure, Mrs. Hale." "Ruth," she corrected. "Just Ruth now." He smiled, and she saw his own ghosts settling. "Well then, just Ruth, ready to bring down an empire." "With you, yes." They spurred their horses toward Prescott, toward justice, toward whatever came after. Behind them, the storm cleared completely, revealing a sky washed blue as church glass, as full of promise as a preacher's widow set free. Samuel's final sermon had been about light conquering darkness, riding toward her new life. Ruth finally understood what he meant. The darkness wasn't just Pike's evil, it was the fear that kept good people silent. But silence was broken now. The light had come. and it would not be hidden again. The Prescott courthouse bustled with activity, but Ruth barely noticed the crowd. She sat in Judge Carter's chambers, reviewing her testimony one final time. Through the window, she could see Quinn talking with the federal marshals, his stance relaxed but alert. "Mrs. Hale," Carter said, his arm still in a sling from the ambush. "The prosecutor wants to review the poisoned well incident. Are you prepared to speak about it?" Ruth nodded, though her stomach churned. "The Hendricks baby, the other children? Yes, I'll testify." A knock interrupted. Marshal Davies entered, his weathered face grim. "Judge, we've got a problem. 3 witnesses have disappeared the Vasquez family. Neighbors say they packed up in the night." "Pike's reach extends even here?" Ruth asked. "Money talks loud," Davies replied, "but we've got others stepping forward. Your testimony lit a fire, ma'am. Folks are finding courage." Through the door, Ruth heard voices rising. She recognized Mrs. Chen's accented English, firm despite everything. The laundry owner had traveled to Prescott with her family, determined to testify. "I should prepare," Ruth said, standing. Carter touched her shoulder. "You've done the hard part, speaking truth when everyone wanted you silent. The rest is just details." Ruth found Quinn in the courthouse hallway. He was talking with a small group she recognized: Benjamin Torres, the Mexican carpenter whose water rights Pike had stolen, and Isaiah Washington, the former Buffalo soldier who'd lost his homestead claim. "Mrs. Hale," Isaiah straightened. "Want to thank you. What you did, standing up, gave us strength to do the same. We stand together or fall separately." Ruth replied. Samuel understood that. "Your husband was a good man," Benjamin added quietly. "He tried to help when Pike took my papers. Now we finish what he started." As the men dispersed, Quinn walked with Ruth to a quiet alcove. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but ready. Davies says Pike's lawyer is ruthless. He'll try to paint you as a bitter widow, maybe worse." "Let him try." Ruth's jaw set. "I've been called worse by better men." Quinn smiled slightly. "That's my girl." The words sent warmth through her, but Ruth pushed the feeling aside. There'd be time for such things after justice was done. "There's something else," Quinn said. "Timothy Webb's been asking for you. He's in the witness room with his father." Ruth found the Webbs sitting apart from the others. The mayor looked older, diminished, but Timothy seemed to have grown inches in the days since the ambush. Mrs. Hale." The boy stood quickly. "I wanted to, that is—" He took a breath. "The Reverend left some music in the church, compositions he was working on. I saved them from Pike's men." He handed her a leather folder. Inside, Ruth found Samuel's careful notation hymns he'd been writing, melodies she'd never heard him play. "He was teaching me harmony." Timothy continued. "Said music could heal what words couldn't touch. I thought, maybe you'd want them." Ruth's eyes burned. Another piece of Samuel she hadn't known. "Thank you, Timothy. Would you play them sometime? I'd like to hear them as he intended." The boy nodded eagerly. "There's a church here with a good organ. Maybe after, when Pike faced justice and Cedar Springs could heal." Ruth held the music to her chest. "I'd like that." A bailiff appeared. "Mrs. Hale, they're ready for you." The courtroom was packed. Ruth saw faces from Cedar Springs, some hostile, others curious, a few supportive. Pike sat at the defense table, his gray suit immaculate, his expression coldly confident. Their eyes met across the room. He smiled slightly, a predator sure of victory. Ruth took the witness stand, placing her hand on the Bible, Samuel's Bible. She realized someone had thought to bring it from evidence. "State your name for the record." The prosecutor began. "Ruth Hale." "Mrs. Hale." Tell us about your husband's final weeks. Ruth spoke carefully, building the story. Samuel's growing concern about missing funds, his discovery of the tampered water rights, the careful documentation he'd hidden. He was afraid, she said, but more afraid of staying silent while people suffered. Pike's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Donovan, objected frequently, but Ruth persisted. She told of the Chen family's stolen papers, the mysterious fires, the poisoned well. That's speculation. Donovan interrupted. You have no proof of deliberate poisoning. I have my husband's notes, his investigation. The ravings of a man dying of fever. Donovan dismissed. Hardly reliable. Ruth's temper flared. Samuel was lucid until the end. His mind stayed clear even as his body failed. So you say, but you weren't exactly a typical wife, were you, Mrs. Hale? Here it came. Ruth straightened. What do you mean? 20 years old, married to a man 43 years your senior, living in his house but not fulfilling wifely duties. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ruth felt heat rise in her face but kept her voice steady. My relationship with Samuel was built on respect and mutual protection. Is that so unusual? Protection from what? Exactly. What were you running from in Tucson? Objection! The prosecutor called relevance. Goes to the witness's credibility. Donovan argued, if she married for convenience, perhaps her testimony is equally convenient. Judge Morrison Carter had recused himself as a witness considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully. Counselor. Ruth met Donovan's smirk with steel. I was running from men who saw my youth and circumstances as invitation to take liberties. Samuel offered honorable protection. If that offends you, perhaps you should examine why. And this protection, it came at a price. Yes, I kept his house, helped with church duties, gave him the appearance of family life he needed. In exchange, he gave me safety and respect. We were honest with each other, which is more than many marriages can claim. Honest, yet you kissed another man days after his death. The accusation hung in the air. Ruth saw Quinn tense in the gallery, saw the judgment in watching faces. Yes, she said simply. I kissed Jonah Quinn. A moment of comfort that became more, I won't apologize for finding human connection in grief. Human connection. Donovan's tone dripped contempt. Is that what you call it, your husband barely cold? My husband was murdered. Ruth's voice cut through his theatrics. While you question my morality, his killer sits at your table counting profits from other people's misery. Objection! Donovan shouted. Sustained. Judge Morrison said, Mrs. Hale, please limit yourself to answering questions. But Ruth had made her point. She saw it in the jury's faces, doubt creeping in about Pike's innocence. The cross-examination continued brutally. Donovan questioned everything: her marriage, her motives, her relationship with Quinn, but Ruth held firm, anchored by truth and fury at the attempted character assassination. Finally, the prosecutor redirected. Mrs. Hale, why risk everything to bring this evidence forward? Ruth looked at Pike, then at the gallery where Mrs. Chen sat with quiet dignity, where Timothy Webb clutched his rescued music. Because silence is complicity. Because good people suffered while I lived safe in my careful arrangement. Because Samuel died believing truth mattered more than reputation. Her voice strengthened. And because someone needs to say enough theft, enough intimidation, enough destroying lives for profit. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. Ruth stepped down on trembling legs. Quinn caught her elbow, guiding her to a seat. His touch grounded her. The trial continued. Mrs. Chen testified through tears about the night men stole their papers. Isaiah Washington spoke of Wells mysteriously failing after he refused to sell. Benjamin Torres produced hidden receipts proving he'd paid fees Pike claimed were outstanding. Then Timothy Webb took the stand. The boy's voice started shaky but grew stronger as he told of Pike's visits to his father. The threats, the promises. How Reverend Hale had been teaching him music and courage both. He said standing for right was like playing harmony. Timothy explained. Sometimes you have to play notes that sound wrong alone, but make the whole piece beautiful. Even Donovan seemed reluctant to attack a child's testimony too harshly. The evidence mounted. Carter, despite his wound, presented the ledger with devastating clarity. The federal marshals testified about the ambush, the connection to the Star Riders. Then came the surprise witness. The prosecution calls Silas Ford. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Ford limped to the stand, still bearing marks from his fight with Quinn. He'd made a deal testimony for reduced charges. Mr. Ford. The prosecutor began. Tell us about your relationship with the defendant. Ford's story emerged reluctantly. The Star Riders' dissolution, Pike's offer of partnership, plans to control the water rights before the railroad arrived, then sell to the highest bidder. What about Reverend Hale? Ford shifted uncomfortably. Pike said he was getting too close, asking questions, had to be handled. Handled how? Prussic acid in his medicine mimics fever symptoms. Pike got it from some doctor back east. The courtroom erupted. Ruth gripped Quinn's hand, hearing confirmation of what she'd suspected. Samuel hadn't died of fever. He'd been murdered, slowly and deliberately. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. Continue, Mr. Ford. Wasn't supposed to be nobody else hurt, just the preacher. But Pike got greedy, started pushing harder. The Hendricks baby? Ford's voice cracked. I didn't sign on for killing children. By the time Ford finished, Pike's confident mask had slipped. He huddled with Donovan, gesturing frantically. The defense's case crumbled quickly. Character witnesses failed to appear. Documents Pike claimed would exonerate him couldn't be found. His own testimony, when it came, rang hollow against the weight of evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Ruth sagged against Quinn as the verdict was read. Murder, fraud, conspiracy, enough to put Pike away forever. As marshals led Pike out, he passed close to Ruth. This isn't over, he hissed. I have friends. So do I, Ruth replied steadily, and mine aren't bought. The courtroom emptied slowly. Ruth found herself surrounded by the people who'd found courage to testify. Mrs. Chen wept with relief. Isaiah Washington stood taller. Timothy Webb clutched his father's hand. What now? Someone asked. It was Quinn who answered. Now you rebuild. Without fear, without Pike's shadow. Outside, Prescott's evening air felt clean. Ruth stood on the courthouse steps, Samuel's Bible in one hand, his music in the other. You did it, Quinn said softly. We did it, all of us. Ruth looked up at him. Samuel would be glad. He'd be proud, of you especially. They walked slowly toward the hotel. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Cedar Springs needed healing, needed new leadership. But tonight, justice had won. Ruth, Quinn said suddenly. I've been thinking about what comes next. She waited. I've spent years chasing ghosts. Maybe it's time I stopped running toward death and started building something living. What kind of something? He stopped walking, turning to face her. The kind that includes a certain preacher's widow, if she'll have a reformed gunman with too many scars. Ruth set down the Bible and music carefully. Then she reached up, tracing the scar on his jaw. I think scars show we've survived, that we're strong enough to heal. Is that a yes? That's a court me proper, Jonah Quinn. I've had one marriage of convenience. The next will be for love or not at all. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. I can do that, starting with dinner. There's a respectable restaurant down the street. Respectable, Ruth teased. How disappointing. Got to start somewhere. Besides, he offered his arm. Your reputation's taken enough hits. Time to build it back. I don't care about reputation anymore. No, but you care about the people counting on you. The ones who need to see that standing for truth doesn't end in ruin. Ruth took his arm, understanding. She was a symbol now, whether she'd chosen it or not. The widow who'd brought down corruption, the woman who'd refused to be silenced. Dinner, then, she agreed. But somewhere with good coffee, I've developed particular standards. They walked into the evening, leaving the courthouse behind. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But tonight, truth had won. Love had sparked, and the lamp burned bright for all to see. In Cedar Springs, church bells would ring again. Children would play by clean wells. Families would hold their papers secure. And somewhere, Ruth thought, Samuel was smiling. The church bell rang clear across Cedar Springs, its bronze voice restored after weeks of silence. Ruth stood in the doorway, watching townspeople file in for the emergency meeting. Some came eagerly, others with the wariness of people too long oppressed. Full house, Quinn observed from beside her. He'd traded his trail clothes for a clean shirt and vest, though the gun still rode his hip. Word spread about Pike's conviction, and about the documents. Ruth added. She held the bundle of deeds and receipts recovered from Pike's office, proof of rightful ownership for dozens of families. Judge Carter says we can start returning them today. The church looked different without Pike's shadow. Timothy Webb sat at the organ, practicing the hymn Samuel had been writing. Mrs. Chen and her family took seats near the front, no longer relegated to the back corners. Isaiah Washington helped elderly Mrs. Morrison to a pew. Sheriff Watson hadn't returned from Prescott. His deputy badge lay on the altar beside Pike's abandoned church ledgers. Friends. Ruth began when the crowd settled. She stood where Samuel once preached, his Bible before her. We've gathered to reclaim what was stolen, not just papers and property, but our community itself. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. First, the practical matters. Ruth lifted the recovered documents. Everyone who lost papers to Pike's schemes, please see Judge Carter after the meeting. He'll verify ownership and return what's yours. What about the water rights? Benjamin Torres called out. The railroad's still coming, which is why we need new leadership. Ruth said, honest leadership, chosen by us, not imposed through fear. Who's going to be sheriff? Someone asked. Watson's done for. Quinn stepped forward. Marshal Davies suggests we elect a temporary sheriff until the county can hold proper elections. Someone the town trusts. Eyes turned to Isaiah Washington. The former soldier straightened. I'd serve, if folks want me. All in favor? Ruth asked. The response was overwhelming. Isaiah had helped too many families to be doubted now. What about the mayor? This from Mrs. Perkins, who'd been notably quiet since Pike's arrest. Webb himself stood slowly. I'll resign. Today, my weakness enabled Pike's evil. I don't deserve your trust. Papa, no, Timothy protested, but Webb shook his head. It's right, son, but I'll stay to help transition if the town allows. Ruth saw nods of grudging respect. Redemption was possible, even for those who'd failed. We need to discuss the railroad. Judge Carter interjected. He'd arrived that morning, arm still bound but determination intact. Southern Pacific will send representatives within the month. The town needs unified negotiation, or you'll be picked apart by land speculators. Form a committee, suggested Agnes from the way station. Equal representation, Anglo, Mexican, Chinese, everyone who calls Cedar Springs home. The radical suggestion sparked debate. Equal representation was almost unheard of, but Pike's evil had taught harsh lessons about exclusion. Samuel would support it, Ruth said quietly, and the church stilled. He believed God's table had room for all. Shouldn't our town follow that example? One by one, hands rose in agreement. Not universal, some faces showed resistance, but enough. Change would come slowly, but it would come. Now, Ruth continued, there's something else. She lifted Samuel's journal. My husband documented more than theft. He wrote about families helped quietly, debts forgiven, kindnesses done without fanfare. I think we should remember the good alongside exposing the evil. She began reading Samuel's record of Timothy's musical gift, his note about providing free burial services for poor families, the times he'd stood between Pike's harassment and vulnerable townspeople. As she read, Ruth saw tears on weathered faces. They were mourning Samuel properly now, not just the minister, but the man who'd fought for them in ways they'd never known. The church door opened. Admitting a late arrival, Ruth's voice faltered as she recognized the woman, Elena Vasquez, whose family had fled before the trial. We came back, Elena said simply. Heard Pike was gone. Heard the widow was making things right. Your papers are here, Ruth assured her. Your land is waiting. Elena's family filed in husband, 3 children, aging mother. They found seats as Ruth continued reading. When she finished, Timothy Webb moved to the organ. The Reverend was teaching me this. He said he called it desert streams about finding water in dry places. The melody that filled the church was simple but beautiful. It spoke of hope surviving drought, of life persisting despite hardship. Ruth felt tears slip down her cheeks. That's lovely. Mrs., Chen said when the music ended. The Reverend, he had poet's heart. Which brings us to the church itself, Judge Carter said. You need new spiritual leadership. The diocese will send candidates. Actually, Ruth interrupted, I have a thought about that. All eyes turned to her. Father Miguel from the mission has served this area for 20 years. He speaks English, Spanish, and some Chinese. He knows our struggles. Ruth took a breath. Why not invite him to serve both congregations, share the buildings, the resources? Shocked silence greeted this suggestion. Protestant and Catholic sharing churches unthinkable. Yet Isaiah Washington stood. Reverend Hale told me once that God's house had many rooms. Maybe it's time we acted like it. Blasphemy, someone muttered, but others looked thoughtful. Try it for 6 months. Quinn suggested, if it doesn't work, seek other arrangements. The debate continued, but Ruth sensed momentum building. Crisis had a way of breaking down walls people thought permanent. As the meeting progressed, she found herself watching Quinn. He stood near the door, ostensibly keeping watch but really giving her space to lead. His presence was steady, unobtrusive, exactly what she needed. One more thing, Ruth said as the gathering prepared to disperse. Pike's house. It was built with stolen money. I propose we convert it to a school. Free education for all children, regardless of background. Who'll teach? Agnes asked. Ruth smiled. I will. To start, I taught letters before Samuel brought me here. Others can help Mrs. Chen with numbers, Timothy with music. We'll build something good from Pike's ashes. The vote was unanimous. Even those who'd whispered about Ruth's reputation couldn't deny her courage deserved respect. As people filed out, many stopped to press Ruth's hand, murmur thanks, promise support. The Chen family bowed deeply. Elena Vasquez kissed her cheek. Isaiah Washington tipped his hat with grave respect. Finally, only Ruth, Quinn, and Judge Carter remained. Well done, Carter said. Samuel would be proud. You've given them hope and direction both. They gave themselves hope, Ruth corrected. I just reminded them they had it. Carter smiled. Spoken like a true leader, which brings me to another matter. He produced an official-looking document. The territorial government wants to appoint you as interim mayor. Ruth's mouth fell open. What I can't, I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person in this room, Carter said firmly. You exposed corruption, united divided factions, proposed practical solutions. Most importantly, people trust you. But a woman mayor? Unusual, not illegal. Wyoming's been discussing women's suffrage. Times are changing. Carter set the document on the pulpit. Think about it. The town needs you. He left them alone in the church. Ruth stared at the appointment papers, mind spinning. It's too much, she said. Teaching school, now this. Quinn moved closer. Is it you've been leading since the moment you stood up to Pike? This just makes it official. People will talk. A widow, involved with a gunman, taking political office. Let them talk. Quinn's voice was gentle but firm. You said you were done living for reputation. Ruth turned to face him. What about us? You said you'd court me proper. How can you do that if I'm running a town? Same way I've done everything else, by adapting. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Ruth, I've watched you these past days. You're magnificent when you're fighting for others. I won't be the man who dims that fire. You'd stay even if I accept this. I told you I was done chasing ghosts. Maybe it's time I helped build something instead. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Besides, a mayor needs protection. Pike had friends who might seek revenge. Is that the only reason you'd stay? Quinn's eyes darkened. You know it's not. The church bell rang, marking the hour. Through the windows, Ruth could see townspeople already organizing. The Vasquez family was moving back into their home. Isaiah Washington was pinning on the sheriff's star. Change was happening, with or without her official leadership. I'll do it, she decided. But on my terms. The council meets publicly. All voices heard, and she looked at Quinn. I won't hide our courtship. They'll accept me as I am, or not at all. That's my girl. Quinn's smile was proud. Though, technically, shouldn't I be courting the Honorable Mayor Hale? Ruth laughed, the sound echoing in the sacred space. Save the formality for public meetings. In private, I'm just Ruth. Never just Ruth. But I take your point. He offered his arm. Shall we tell the judge? Then perhaps lunch. I believe I promised proper courtship. You did. Though given we've already survived gunfights together, perhaps we can skip some conventional steps. Such as... Ruth stood on her toes, kissing him softly. Unlike their desperate embraces during crisis, this was gentle, promising. When they parted, both were smiling. Such as pretending we don't already know this is real, she said. Scandalous. What will the mayor's constituents think? That their mayor chooses love over fear, that she's done hiding her light for anyone's comfort. Ruth gathered the appointment papers. Come on, we have a town to rebuild. They left the church together, stepping into brilliant afternoon sun. Around them, Cedar Springs was already transforming. Children played in the streets without fear. Families reclaimed their homes. The shadow of Pike's corruption was lifting like morning mist. At the cemetery, Ruth saw someone had placed fresh flowers on Samuel's grave. The wooden marker now bore an addition, "He stood for truth." Thank you, she whispered to the desert wind, for everything. Quinn squeezed her hand, understanding. They walked on toward the judge's office, toward their future, toward the life Samuel's sacrifice had made possible. Behind them, Timothy Webb practiced another of Samuel's compositions. The music drifted through open church doors, blessing the reborn town with melody. The old Cedar Springs had died with Pike's conviction. What rose now was something new, imperfect, struggling, but honest. A place where widows could become mayors, where drifters could find home, where light no longer hid beneath bushels. Ruth signed the appointment papers with a steady hand. Mayor Ruth Hale. It had a nice sound. Ready for this? Judge Carter asked. She thought of Samuel's quiet courage, of Quinn's steadfast protection, of all the people counting on her. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." Outside, the church bell rang again, not hollow now, but full of promise. Cedar Springs had found its voice, and Ruth had found hers. The wooden bridge stretched across Cedar Creek, its planks worn smooth by years of wagon traffic. Ruth stood at its center, watching Pike's men approach from the east. He'd escaped during transport to prison. The marshals found the wagon overturned, guards unconscious but alive. Now he was coming home to reclaim what he'd lost. 6 riders, Quinn said quietly beside her. "Pike, Garrett, 4 others I don't recognize. Hired guns." Isaiah Washington confirmed from her other side. The new sheriff had proven capable in the 2 weeks since his appointment. "Question is, do we meet them here or let them come to town?" Ruth had already decided. Here, away from families and children. She turned to the dozen townspeople who'd answered her call. "Remember, we stand together. No heroes, no vengeance, just justice." Behind them, more riders appeared. Judge Carter with federal marshals, summoned by telegraph when Pike's escape was discovered, but they were still minutes away. Pike reined up at the bridge's eastern edge. Prison had not improved him. His fine clothes were replaced by trail gear, his careful grooming gone wild, but his eyes burned with the same cold fury. "Mayor Hale," he called mockingly. "Quite the rise for a temptress widow." "Mr. Pike," Ruth replied evenly. "You're under arrest for escape and murder. Surrender now, and no one needs to die." Pike laughed. "Die, the only death today will be yours. Woman, you and that drifter who killed Ford." "Ford died fighting," Quinn said. "More than you did. You ran like the coward you are." Garrett's hand moved toward his gun, but Pike stopped him. "Not yet. I want the whole town to see this." He raised his voice. "Cedar Springs, you let a harlot lead you, a woman who shared her bed before her husband's grave was settled." "Liar!" Timothy Webb called out. The boy had insisted on coming, over his father's protests. "Mrs. Hale saved us from you." "Saved you?" Pike's laugh was ugly. "She destroyed everything I built, the prosperity coming with the railroad, the growth all ruined for her petty revenge." "You poisoned children," Ruth said, her voice carrying clearly. "You burned out families. You murdered my husband." "I removed obstacles to progress." Pike snarled. "Your husband was a fool, protecting worthless people who contributed nothing." "Those worthless people are the town." Benjamin Torres spoke up. "We built Cedar Springs, not you." "You built nothing." Pike's control cracked. "Mexicans, Chinese, indigents, you're parasites. I was cleansing this place for decent folks." "Decent like you, Mrs." Chen stepped forward. Tiny but fierce. "You take our papers, burn our home, call it decent." The crowd stirred angrily. Pike had miscalculated his words, reminded them why they'd united against him. "Enough talk." Pike declared, "Clear the bridge, or we'll ride you down." "No," Ruth said simply. She stood in the center of the span, Samuel's Bible in one hand, the mayor's seal in the other. Behind her, the townspeople linked arms, Anglo and Mexican, Chinese and black, men and women together. "You'll have to go through all of us," Isaiah Washington stated. Pike's men shifted nervously. They'd expected fear, not unity. One whispered urgently to Pike, pointing at the approaching dust cloud of the marshals. "Law's coming, boss," Garrett warned. "We should go." "Not without what's mine." Pike spat. He drew his pistol, aiming at Ruth. "Last chance. Which? The ledgers. The seized assets, return them all." Quinn moved, but Ruth caught his arm. "No, this is my fight." She stepped forward, away from the protective line. "You want the ledgers. They're in evidence in Prescott. The assets returned to their rightful owners. Your house, it's a school now, where all children learn together." "My house," Pike's face purpled. You turned my house into a school for mongrels. I turned a monument to greed into a place of hope. Ruth corrected. Samuel would appreciate the irony. Samuel was weak, like you. Pike cocked the pistol. But bullets cure weakness. Pike! Marshal Davies's voice boomed across the distance. Drop the weapon! Pike glanced back, saw the marshals closing fast. His moment was ending. Ruth saw decision flash in his eyes. If he couldn't have Cedar Springs, he'd at least have revenge. The shot, when it came, seemed to echo forever. But it wasn't Pike who fired. Elena Vasquez stood at the bridge's side approach, her husband's old rifle smoking. Pike's gun spun from his hand as he clutched his shoulder, cursing. For my children, Elena said quietly, who you made homeless. Chaos erupted. Garrett went for his gun, but Quinn was faster. The big man toppled from his saddle. 2 hired guns tried to flee, only to find the marshals blocking retreat. The others threw down their weapons, seeing the odds. Pike, wounded and horseless, tried to run. It was Timothy Webb who stopped him, throwing a rope with surprising skill. The boy had been practicing. It seemed... That's for Reverend Hale, Timothy declared as Pike sprawled in the dust. Within minutes, it was over. Pike and his men were shackled, the marshals efficient in their work. Doc Morris intended Pike's shoulder a clean wound that would heal for his eventual hanging. Ruth stood at the bridge's center, adrenaline leaving her shaky. Quinn's arms came around her, steady and warm. You all right? Yes, she leaned into him. It's finished. Is it? Quinn turned her to face the town. Look. The crowd hadn't dispersed. Instead, more people had joined families who'd hidden during Pike's reign. Workers from the mines, ranchers from outlying areas. They stood together, watching their mayor with something like awe. Speech, someone called. Others took up the cry. Ruth straightened. These people had risked everything standing with her. They deserved words to match their courage. Friends, she began, then louder as the crowd quieted. Today, Cedar Springs proved something. We proved that unity is stronger than division, that courage is contagious, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stand together. Murmurs of agreement rippled outward. Pike thought he could rule through fear. He believed hate was stronger than hope. Ruth's voice strengthened. He was wrong. Look around you. See who stood together not despite our differences, but because of them. Each brought unique strength. Together, we're unbreakable. What happens now? Someone called. Now we build, Ruth said. The railroad comes soon. Land speculators will follow. They'll try to divide us, play on old prejudices. But we've learned better. We'll negotiate as one town, one people. No one gets left behind. Isaiah Washington raised the question Ruth had expected. What about Justice Pike murdered folks? Others helped him. The law will handle Pike, Ruth assured him. As for others, she looked at faces in the crowd, some guilty, some ashamed. Samuel believed in redemption. Those who profited from Pike's evil can make amends, return stolen money, help rebuild what was destroyed. Or they can leave. Choose. And you, Martha Perkins asked, you staying as mayor? Ruth felt Quinn's hand find hers. I'm staying. This is my home now. Our home. She smiled at the crowd. Besides, that school won't run itself. Who's sending their children? Hands rose throughout the crowd, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Even some who'd supported Pike nodded agreement. Their children deserved better than their parents' prejudices. As the crowd began dispersing, Judge Carter approached. Magnificent. Mayor Hale, you've built something remarkable here. We all built it, Ruth corrected. I just helped them see it was possible. Carter smiled. Spoken like a true leader. The territorial governor will want to meet you. There's talk of statehood. Eventually they'll need people like you. Ruth shook her head. One challenge at a time. Judge, we still have a town to run. As the marshals led Pike away, he twisted to glare at Ruth. "This isn't over. I have friends." "So did Samuel," Ruth interrupted. "But his friends remained after death. Will yours?" Pike had no answer. They took him away, diminished and defeated. The bridge cleared slowly. Families walked home together, talking excitedly about the school, the railroad negotiations, the future. Ruth heard laughter, real laughter, free of fear. "You did it," Quinn said softly. "We did it." Ruth turned in his arms. "All of us, including you, especially you." "I just stood behind you. You stood beside me. There's a difference." She touched his face. "A difference I'd like to make permanent." Quinn's eyes widened. "Ruth Hale, are you proposing—" "I'm suggesting that a mayor needs a sheriff. Isaiah's good, but temporary. The town trusts you now." She smiled. "Plus, courting is easier when we're not dodging bullets." "Sheriff Quinn," he tested the words, "has a nice sound, though people might talk about the mayor and sheriff being involved." "Let them. We've hidden enough truths in this town." Ruth kissed him, not caring who saw. "Besides, married couples can't testify against each other. Might be useful. Practical and romantic. I'm charmed." Quinn's expression grew serious. "But Ruth, I need you to know my past isn't pretty. Things might surface. Then we'll face them together, like we faced Pike." Ruth laced their fingers. "I'm not afraid of your shadows. Jonah, we all have them. The point is choosing light anyway." A commotion near the church caught their attention. Father Miguel had arrived from the mission, and townspeople were greeting him warmly. The priest caught Ruth's eye and nodded he'd accepted the shared ministry proposal. "More bridges to build," Ruth murmured. "Good thing we're getting experienced at it," Quinn replied. They walked hand in hand toward town. The sun was setting, painting Cedar Springs in shades of gold and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the railroad, integration, the slow work of healing. But tonight, the town was free. At the cemetery, Ruth paused by Samuel's grave. Someone had added fresh flowers, marigolds, bright as flame. "We did it, Samuel," she whispered. "Truth won. Light won. The town you loved is becoming what you dreamed." Wind stirred the flowers, and Ruth imagined she heard his voice, "Well done, my dear girl. Well done indeed." Quinn waited patiently as she said goodbye. When she rejoined him, her eyes were wet but peaceful. "Ready?" he asked. Ruth looked at her town scarred but healing, diverse but united, small but mighty. Her town now, in ways that went beyond any official appointment. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready for whatever comes next." They walked into the gathering dusk, toward the life they'd chosen, the love they'd earned, and the future they'd build together. Behind them, the bridge stood strong, a symbol of connections that hatred couldn't break. And in the church, Timothy Webb played Samuel's music, filling the evening with harmony born from discord, beauty from ashes, hope from the hardest ground. Cedar Springs had been reborn, and with it, everyone who called it home. 3 months had passed since Pike's capture. The school bell donated by the Chen family rang clear in the morning air. Ruth stood at the doorway, watching children arrive for lessons. Anglo, Mexican, Chinese, and black children walked together, their laughter mixing like streams joining a river. 23 today, Elena Vasquez reported, helping organize the younger students. The Martinez twins finally convinced their father. Ruth smiled. The school had started with just 12 brave souls. Now parents competed to enroll their children, seeing education as the key to a better future. "Mrs. Quinn!" Little Mary Chen ran up, clutching a slate. "Look, I wrote my name in English and Chinese." "Excellent work." "Mary?" Ruth examined the careful characters. Keep practicing. Someday you'll write in many languages." The child beamed and scampered inside. Ruth still felt a flutter hearing her married name. The wedding had been 2 weeks ago, a simple ceremony in the church. Father Miguel and the visiting Protestant minister sharing duties. Half the town attended. The other half sent gifts quietly, still adjusting to change. Morning, Mayor Quinn. Jonah appeared with his easy smile, sheriff's star glinting. He'd won the official election by a landslide, his past forgotten in light of his present service. Sheriff Quinn. She straightened his collar, a wifely gesture that still felt wonderfully new. "Any trouble?" "Just Mrs. Morrison's chickens in the Torres garden again, handled with diplomacy and corn feed." He glanced at the school. "Railroad representatives arrive tomorrow." "I know. The council's prepared. United negotiation. Fair prices for all." Ruth had spent weeks organizing the town's position. No one would be cheated this time. Nervous. Terrified. But Samuel used to say courage meant acting despite fear. She touched the simple gold band on her finger, Jonah's mother's ring, carried through years of wandering. "Besides, I have backup." The sound of organ music drifted from the church. Timothy Webb, now the official organist for both congregations, practiced daily. He'd grown inches and gained confidence. No longer the frightened boy who'd fumbled at the keys. "Ruth?" Agnes called from across the street. "Town meeting tonight?" "Yes, about the water cooperative." 7 sharp. Ruth confirmed. "Bring the survey maps Bill made." The water cooperative was her latest project, shared management of Cedar Springs' most precious resource. It had taken months of negotiation, but even former Pike supporters saw the wisdom in unity. Inside the school, Ruth found her usual controlled chaos. Isaiah Washington taught arithmetic to older students, his military precision making mathematics clear. Mrs. Chen handled the youngest children with patient grace. Even Martha Perkins had volunteered, teaching needlework and secretly learning as much as she taught. "Good morning, everyone," Ruth called. "Good morning, Mrs. Quinn." The chorus came back in multiple accents. She moved through the room, checking work, offering encouragement. These children would grow up different, seeing diversity as strength, education as birthright, cooperation as natural. They were Cedar Springs' true treasure. At lunch, she found Jonah waiting with a picnic basket. "Thought you might need a break." They walked to the cemetery, their regular lunch spot. Samuel's grave now had a proper headstone, paid for by community donation. Fresh flowers always adorned it, the town's quiet tribute to the man who'd started their transformation. "Any word from Prescott?" Jonah asked, sharing sandwiches. "Judge Carter writes that Pike's trial is next month. They want me to testify again." "We'll go together." "I hoped you'd say that." Ruth leaned against him, drawing comfort. "Sometimes I still can't believe we won, that Pike's really gone." "His kind is never fully gone," Jonah said quietly. "There'll always be those who profit from division and fear, but now the town knows how to fight them." A shadow fell across them. Ruth looked up to find Webb, former mayor, now town clerk, holding papers. "Sorry to interrupt." Webb said, "Railroad contracts arrived early. They're aggressive." Ruth scanned the documents, frowning. The Southern Pacific offered far less than fair value for right-of-way, demanded excessive control over water access. "They think we're desperate," she murmured. "Another isolated town to exploit." "Are we desperate?" Webb asked anxiously. Ruth smiled. "No, we're united. Big difference." She stood, brushing off her skirt. "Call an emergency council meeting. 4 o'clock. Make sure everyone knows." The afternoon flew by. Ruth taught her classes with half her mind on strategy. How to show the railroad that Cedar Springs wouldn't be bullied. How to negotiate from strength when they had so little. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Quinn. Ben Chen, Mrs. Chen's oldest, raised his hand during history lesson. My uncle in San Francisco writes that Northern Pacific also seeks roots. Competition for territory. Ruth's eyes lit up. Competition! Ben, you're brilliant! The council meeting buzzed with energy. Representatives from every community segment crowded into the former Pike Mansion, now serving as town hall and school. Southern Pacific thinks we have no options, Ruth explained. But if Northern Pacific knows this route is available... Bidding war. Isaiah finished. Let them compete for us. Risky. Webb warned. If neither bites, we get nothing. Then we make ourselves irresistible. Ruth turned to the gathered faces. What does Cedar Springs have that other towns don't? Water, Benjamin offered. Unity, Elena added. Location, Agnes contributed. Halfway between mining camps and cattle ranges. Exactly. We're not just offering land. We're offering a stable, unified community with guaranteed water rights and strategic position. Ruth's enthusiasm was infectious. Mrs. Chen, can your brother's connections help us reach Northern Pacific? I write tonight. Mrs. Chen promised. Isaiah, we need detailed surveys of alternate routes. Benjamin, document our water capacity. Everyone else gather testimonials about town stability, growth potential, anything that makes us valuable. The room erupted in planning. Ruth watched with satisfaction as former enemies worked side by side. This was Samuel's true legacy, not just exposing Pike's evil, but building something better in its place. As the meeting concluded, Father Miguel approached. Mayor Quinn, a moment. They stepped onto the porch. The priest looked troubled. I've received a letter, he said quietly, from a woman in Tucson. She claims to know your past, threatens to expose things if you don't resign. Ruth's blood chilled. She'd known this might come her life before Samuel wasn't pristine. What things? She didn't specify, only that it would destroy your reputation. Ruth thought of the brothel where she'd worked as a seamstress, the owner who'd had darker plans, the night she'd fled with bruises and torn clothes. Samuel had found her at the stage station, had seen her desperation and offered escape. Thank you for telling me. Ruth's voice stayed steady. I'll handle it. How? She smiled grimly. By remembering that darkness hates light. Secrets have power only in shadow. That evening's public meeting was packed. Word of the railroad negotiations had spread, and anxiety rippled through the crowd. Ruth stood before them, Jonah beside her, the council arrayed behind. Friends, she began. Before we discuss the railroad, I need to address something personal. Confused murmurs arose. Someone from my past has threatened to expose my history if I don't resign. Ruth's voice carried clearly. Rather than wait for lies mixed with truth, I'll tell you myself. Jonah squeezed her hand. They'd discussed this honesty as weapon and shield. Before I met Samuel, I worked in a Tucson boarding house. The owner expected more than housework from young women. When I refused, he made life unbearable. I fled with nothing, planning to head east. The crowd was silent, absorbing this. Samuel found me at the stage station hungry, frightened, alone. He offered marriage not from desire, but from compassion, protection in exchange for companionship. I accepted, grateful for safety. We know this, someone called. Pike exposed your arrangement. He exposed half-truths. Here's the full truth. I was neither saint nor sinner, just a young woman trying to survive in a world that offers few choices to the desperate. Ruth lifted her chin. If that disqualifies me as mayor, say so now, but I won't lead from shadow. This town has had enough of that. The silence stretched. Then Mary Chen's piping voice, Mama says you're brave. I think so too. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Agnes stood. We've all got pasts. Difference is, you faced yours to protect us. That's leadership. One by one, voices rose in support. Not universal, some faces showed disapproval, but overwhelming. Ruth felt tears threaten. "Thank you," she managed. "Now, about the railroad." She outlined their strategy. The crowd caught fire with possibility. By meeting's end, committees were formed, tasks assigned, hope kindled. As people dispersed, Martha Perkins approached hesitantly. "Mayor Quinn, I owe you an apology. I was cruel when you first came." "Fear makes us cruel," Ruth replied. "Pike cultivated fear like a crop." "Yes." Martha met her eyes. "I have a cousin with Northern Pacific. Would a letter help?" Ruth smiled. "Every connection helps, thank you." Later, in their small house, the parsonage she'd once fled, now filled with new memories, Ruth sat at Samuel's old desk. Jonah brought coffee, setting it gently beside her. "Regrets?" he asked. "No, relief. The worst secret is out, and the town didn't crumble." She pulled him down for a kiss. "Besides, I learned something today." "What's that?" "Cedar Springs doesn't need a perfect leader. It needs an honest one." Ruth gestured at the window, where lanterns glowed in homes throughout town. "They're strong enough to handle truth now. Samuel would be proud." "He'd be proud of you." Jonah's voice was soft. "I am." A knock interrupted. Timothy Webb stood at the door, holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Quinn, I've been organizing Reverend Hale's music. Found something you should see." Inside was a composition titled Ruth's Song. The notation was recent, dated just days before Samuel's death. "He was writing it for you," Timothy explained. "See the notes, for the daughter I never had, whose light refuses to be hidden." Ruth traced the notes with trembling fingers. Even facing death, Samuel had been creating beauty, believing in her future. "Will you play it?" she asked Timothy. "At Sunday service, both congregations together." The young man now smiled. "Father Miguel says music is the universal prayer." After Timothy left, Ruth and Jonah sat on the porch, watching stars emerge. Desert sounds surrounded them, mayotes, wind, the eternal whisper of sand and time. "What are you thinking?" Jonah asked. "About light and darkness, Samuel's lamp metaphor." Ruth found his hand. "I used to think hiding light meant being fearful. Now I think sometimes we hide it to protect it, keep it safe until it's strong enough to blaze free." "And now?" Ruth smiled. "Now it blazes. Look at Cedar Springs. Jonah, children learning together. Families reclaiming dignity. Former enemies planning shared futures. That's Samuel's light, spreading person to person. Your light too. Our light, all of us who chose hope over fear." A shooting star streaked overhead. Ruth made a wish not for herself, but for the children sleeping safe in beds throughout town, for the future they'd build. "The railroad will come," she said. "Change will follow, some good, some bad. We'll face it together." Jonah promised. "The whole town?" "Yes." Ruth stood, pulling him up. "But tonight, let's just be us, Ruth and Jonah. Home at last." They went inside, leaving the stars to their ancient dance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, negotiations, threats, the endless work of building community. But tonight, Cedar Springs slept peaceful. The cemetery held its quiet dead, including one whose sacrifice had saved a town. The church stood ready for shared worship. The school waited for eager children. And in a small house where shadows once ruled, light glowed steady, not hidden, not fearful, but bright as desert stars, warm as love chosen freely, eternal as truth told brave. The widow's lamp burned on, its flame now tended by many hands. Samuel's greatest sermon had been his death, teaching a town that some things matter more than life. His greatest legacy was the woman he'd saved, who'd saved others in return. In the morning, bells would ring again. Children would learn. Families would prosper. and Cedar Springs would continue becoming what it was meant to be, a place where all found welcome, where light conquered darkness daily, where love was not just spoken, but lived. The desert wind sang through the streets, and if it sounded like organ music, like a preacher's final blessing, perhaps that too was part of the plan. Light, once revealed, is hard to hide again. And Cedar Springs had seen the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. I hope Ruth and Jonah's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below, whether you're in a big city dreaming of desert sunsets or in a small town that knows the power of community. Let's connect and share our thoughts about this tale. If you enjoyed The Preacher's Virgin Widow, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic frontier tales. Hit that like button if Ruth's courage inspired you. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate real stories of love conquering fear. Until next time, partners, keep your light burning bright.